Chapter 361. Are these the friends you mentioned? Clearly, this guy in the water dungeon was not in a good mood to talk about how he ended up in the dungeon, so he began to change the topic. Yes, let me introduce you. Brother Yu introduced his teammates one by one. Each and every one of them was so famous that any player would have to express their amazement. This guy in front of him was no exception. On the other hand, Unsworn Sword had also learned a lot from this introduction. Only now did he know that this Han family young master was the Sword Demon's shadow military advisor, Drunkard. He could not help but be surprised. This was also a famous expert. After Brother Yu introduced the four people, he introduced Unsworn Sword and Feng Xing. In comparison, Unsworn Sword and Feng Xing were equivalent to a rich landlord in a village, while Sword Demon and Yutian Shenming were equivalent to Nangong Baiming, Shimen Dongfang, and other aristocratic families in the martial world. They would be respected no matter where they went. They were not on the same level at all. Then Brother Yu introduced this guy in the water dungeon to them. His lines were very simple. This is a friend of mine. You might have heard of his name before, Jianan Yu. The next reaction completely reflected the difference between aristocratic families and rich landlords. When the four experts heard this idea of the 5 roaches, they all let out a long, "Oh," expressing the meaning of "so it's you." As for Unsworn Sword, he looked so excited that he wanted to jump into the water dungeon to share the joys and sorrows with others. People like him who were involved in business loved to make friends with various experts in the game. That was why he wanted to tag along when he heard that the child elite group was going to visit a certain someone. At this moment, when he heard that the other party was actually a top-notch expert of the 5 roaches, Unsworn Sword's desire to make friends with him grew even stronger. Although he knew that the other party had definitely made a name for himself in Linshui City, and it was impossible for him to invite him to Cloud City, he could at least get to know him and become friends. Who knows, maybe in the future, they would have the opportunity to establish a 28 club alliance or something. Even if they didn't have any more opportunities to cooperate, he could still brag about it on the dinner table. He could say that he was very familiar with one of the 5 elites. Thinking up to this point, Unsworn Sword had already squatted down, stretching out his arm to shake the other party's hand. Jian Nanyu was a gentleman. Although he was uncomfortable in the water, he did not refuse. Instead, he reminded her in a gentlemanly manner, "Sorry, my hands are wet." "Let's do it." Unsworn Sword clenched his fists so tightly that he almost pulled Jian Nanyu up. "For today's trip, I'll have to ask for your help, brother." Unsworn Sword was truly generous. He had only just gotten to know each other, but he was already preparing to hand over the quest. This was also where Unsworn Sword understood the ways of the world. Now that he mentioned this in front of Brother Yu, it was unlikely that the other party would reject him. Moreover, Brother Yu and the others would inevitably speak up for him. If he waited until the party was over, and he came looking for him alone, it was hard to say if the other party would help him. Jian Nanyu was initially quite puzzled as to why this person was so enthusiastic. Now that he saw that the other party was asking for his help, he understood. Thus he did not ask further and immediately nodded. Sure. Did someone steal your equipment? If you want to steal equipment, you'll have to hurry." "What? What did you say?" Unsworn Sword suspected that he had misheard. He felt that what Jian Nanyu had just said was completely different from what he had said. "You didn't get your equipment stolen? Then there's no need to hurry. How much money was stolen? If I have enough on me, I can give it to you now," said Jian Nanyu. Unsworn Sword was even more confused. He raised his head and looked at Brother Yu blankly. His hand that had been holding Jian Nanyu loosened a little. Brother Yu finally spoke up for Unsworn Sword. He frowned and asked Jian Nanyu, "What are you talking about?" Jian Nanyu was also stunned. He looked at Unsworn Sword again and said carefully, "Didn't you get robbed when you came on the boat?" "Robbed? No," said Unsworn Sword. Cough. "Forget about the conversation just now." Jian Nanyu coughed. However, the others had already understood. For example, Sword Demon frowned and asked, "What do you do?" I'm a professional player." Jian Nanyu raised his head and looked at Sword Demon. Sword Demon was a famous person. It was not difficult for players who paid attention to him to know his character. Jian Nanyu knew that this boss-level character, who had limitless glory in countless games, was a rare upright person compared to ordinary players. Although he was not as deep as someone who hated evil as his enemy, he at least disdained people with bad character. For players like him, he could already hear some clues from Jian Nanyu's self-confident slip of the tongue. As a professional player, Jian Nanyu's profession was probably very improper. Speaking of which, this kind of behavior of killing people's equipment was not strange in the oldest online games. Today, the game had even developed to the point of professionalization, industrialization, and collectivization. This also proved the vigorous development and vitality of online games from a dark side. For most players, they would not pay too much attention to such characters as long as they did not drop their equipment. Some people would even strive to become friends with them to prevent them from dropping their equipment. Online games were never a place to breed righteous heroes. Even a rare upright person like Sword Demon, if he had not become a victim of such behavior in the parallel world, might not have been so indignant when he met such a character. Jian Nanyu and Sword Demon's gazes were already sparking. However, Brother Yu quickly came out to smooth things over. He put one hand on Sword Demon's shoulder and squeezed it. He laughed and said, "We are passing by on a quest. This brother is the guild leader of this quest. You're familiar with this place. He means that you might be able to provide some help in this aspect." In the introduction just now, Brother Yu only mentioned each person's name. He did not mention Sword Without Oath status. Oh, so that's how it is. Jian Nanyu shifted his gaze away from the battle and looked at Sword Without Oath again. That's easy. We'll contact each other after we get out. Just let me know if you need any help. Thank you, thank you. Unsworn Sword was a classic example of a person who, regardless of whether the other party was good or bad, could become friends as long as the other party did not get on his bad side. Now that Unsworn Sword was even willing to help him, it would not be impossible for them to become brothers. By the way, didn't you say that you wanted to introduce a powerful person to me? These people shouldn't be him, right? Brother, you only mentioned the names of the 6 people he introduced. Han family young master briefly mentioned Drunkard, to let him know who he was. With such an equal and concise introduction, it was obvious that they were not the special guest. Cough. Brother, you let out a hollow laugh. You might have met him before. Jian Nanyu was confused. He's the video magician. Brother, you confessed. The guy that put me in jail? Jian Nanyu was very excited. The sound of water splashing was the proof. I'm afraid so. Brother Yu glanced at his companions as he spoke. They clearly agreed with his judgment. We're friends, forget it. Brother Yu had already started to help Gu Fei. And Jian Nanyu actually responded in such a simple manner. The speed at which he calmed down was shocking. Well, we'll be leaving first. We'll talk when you're out. How many hours are you in jail? Brother Yu asked. 4, Jian Nanyu replied. All right, we'll be leaving first. Brother Yu prepared to lead everyone out. Sword Demon left without hesitation. Brother Yu was also worried that something unpleasant might happen if he continued to stay, so he hurriedly expressed his intention to leave. Only Unsworn Sword was reluctant to leave, but his friend was about to leave. As someone he had just met, he didn't have the face to continue staying. Guild leader Unsworn, about your guild mission. You can talk to him yourself when he's out, okay? Brother Yu said to Unsworn Sword after leaving the dungeon. All right, no problem. Thanks. Unsworn Sword nodded happily. Also, he's a standard professional gamer. If he thinks it's too troublesome, he might charge a fee. I can't really persuade him otherwise. After all, he relies on this to make a living. Don't mind him. Brother Yu said. I understand, no problem. Unsworn Sword didn't mind at all. Then that's it for now. Brother Yu said goodbye to Unsworn Sword on behalf of the 5 young masters. Sword Demon's expression was still uncertain. After the 5 of them walked for a distance, he finally asked Brother Yu, "What does this friend of yours do?" Brother Yu seemed to have been waiting for this question. I only know that he's always been a professional gamer, but I didn't know that this time, he's playing this profession. There were many types of professional gamers. There were the hardest gold farming groups, the more capable selling their bodies, and the more business-minded reselling groups. Some specialized in one of these, while others were all-rounders. These were the more open and above-board ways of playing the profession. Other than that, there were also professional gamers with a dark side. For example, those who stole people's equipment was one of them. Other than that, there was also the scamming industry that could infiltrate the various categories. In the early days, there were even people who stole accounts for a living. However, with the improvement of safety awareness and security technology, this business was extinct. However, in the parallel world that used holographic simulation, some new nasty businesses were created. According to rumors, a very primitive service industry had appeared in some of the main cities. This was a clearly unhealthy trend, but it was strongly supported by many people, especially men. It was said that this industry was enough to set off a tourism frenzy in the game. At this time, Sword Demon was very disdainful of Jian Nan's profession, but this person was Brother Yu's friend. How to properly handle various interpersonal relationships without losing their principles was a big problem. For a moment, no one knew how to do it. The five of them kept moving forward in silence until they passed by a tavern where the Han family young master disappeared. After the other four discovered it, they said goodbye and went their separate ways. Chapter 362. The next day, Gu Fei logged on rather early. He wanted to thoroughly clean up his PK points. At 7 p.m., everyone had to be on their way again. If a PK battle were to occur on the road, it would be too much of a burden. It was better to have a lower PK points. He quickly rushed to the wanted quest office. Before he reached the entrance, Gu Fei had already slowed down his footsteps. His keen intuition told him that someone was paying attention to him. Linshui City's wanted quest office was very close to the local market. Because there wasn't enough space, the stalls in the market had already extended to this location. This caused the place to be bustling with people. Gu Fei couldn't clearly tell who it was, but he was sure that the other party was doing it on purpose. A casual glance from the two of them and a focused stare were two completely different situations. The latter was what Gu Fei described as killing intent. As for the former, it was too weak, and it only lasted for a moment, so it was basically impossible to catch. At this moment, Gu Fei had already sensed that someone was watching him. Moreover, this feeling continued. It was clear that the other party didn't know that Gu Fei had already discovered him. Gu Fei had experienced this kind of brazen surveillance too many times in the game. A thief in stealth was this unscrupulous. Unfortunately, in a crowded place, Gu Fei couldn't clearly catch them. But because of this, he stopped and pretended to admire the goods on the roadside stalls. In his heart, he was constantly calculating. They didn't come with good intentions. That was for sure. If they were looking for him for something normal, they wouldn't need to use stealth surveillance. After seeing him, they would immediately rush over to greet him. As for who they were, it wasn't too hard to guess. This city's robbing business had already expanded to the water. How could the land be peaceful? Gu Fei reckoned that this group of people were the same as yesterday. They hadn't given up on their evil intentions, and had come looking for him again. Being watched at the entrance of the wanted quest office shouldn't be a coincidence. It was very likely that the other party had arranged people here to wait for him to appear. They expected that with Gu Fei's gorgeous PK points, they would definitely come to clean up. However, when he logged off yesterday, there was no such arrangement. Could it be that these guys waited patiently for him to come back online for an entire day and night? How persevering. However, now that he had been squatting for so long, why was the person staring at him still the same? Could it be that this person was the only one who could deal with him? He was looking down on himself too much. Or could it be that the one on the street was just a lookout, and the real ambush was at the place where he had to go? The wanted mission office. While Gu Fei was thinking, he turned around and glanced at the door of the wanted mission office. What a familiar door. Closed as usual. Gu Fei stared silently for a long time, but did not see anyone enter or leave. Gu Fei was familiar with this door. It was abnormal for so few players to enter and exit. This made him even more certain that there was something fishy going on. But as the saying goes, the skilled are bold. After confirming that the ambush was in this room, Gu Fei was mentally prepared and immediately walked towards the room. He wanted to see what other tricks these guys had up their sleeves. Arriving in front of the door, Gu Fei stretched out his hand and grabbed the door handle. This door had 2 doors on the left and right. Gu Fei stretched out his arm and only pushed open the left half of the door. His hand continued to hold onto the door handle, and he only took half a step in. His right hand held the sword horizontally across his body and formed a small sword sign. Whether it was slashing, stabbing, or casting spells in any direction, he could cast them at the fastest speed. It could be considered as a sword move that Gu Fei had created, and was very suitable for the game. As soon as he took half a step in, Gu Fei could already feel the murderous aura, especially on the right side. There was no one there, but the murderous aura was the strongest. Of course, Gu Fei knew that it was a thief in stealth who was currently rushing towards him. But Gu Fei was already prepared for this. After his left foot planted firmly on the ground, his right foot that was still outside the room immediately pushed forward, and the door on the right was immediately pushed in. This door was very flexible, and the opening required at least 500 agility. The thief that was rushing over did not expect this, and with a bang he was hit by the door, and could only cry out in pain. There was an ambush on the right side, so how could there not be one on the left side? Gu Fei's right foot hooked onto the door, and his left hand was not idle either. He stretched out his left arm, and the door went straight towards the wall. The guy on the other side probably saw that the door was open, and was about to circle around and attack. He did not expect that Gu Fei would open the door so excessively, directly opening it 180 degrees. After crying out in pain, he was also stuck to the wall along with the door. Of course, this was only temporary. If it was a Herculean warrior, perhaps they would be able to press the person to death behind the door. But Gu Fei knew his own limits, so he did not try this at all. After pushing the person against the door, he quickly pulled the door back, protecting it on his left side. With the night streamer on his right, he smiled and said, "Why is it so crowded here?" There were indeed quite a few people in the room, and they were all pretending to be queuing up to receive a quest. What they did not know was that Gu Fei had been waiting outside for a long time, and did not see anyone come out. The system's quests weren't issued at the ticket window of the train station, and after so long, there was still a bunch of people queuing up. This was very telling. After Gu Fei finished speaking, the room became silent, and then with a squeak, the door on the right side closed on its own. A thief behind the door covered his nose, and fiercely glared at Gu Fei. "Are you okay?" Gu Fei asked. "I don't know if this door has any attack power. Did your health drop?" "Ah!" The thief roared, and with both hands holding onto his dagger, he rushed towards Gu Fei. Then with another pung, the door on the right flashed in and out. Gu Fei shook his head. You're not improving at all. You can hit the same door twice. Do you know how much damage you'll take this time?" At this time, the thief on the left came out from behind the door, and stabbed with his dagger. Unexpectedly, Gu Fei's body shrank back, causing the left half of the door to turn back 45 degrees. The thief stabbed the door with his knife. Gu Fei then pushed again, and with another pung, the thief on the left also covered his nose and retreated. "Look, this door is movable." Gu Fei pushed it twice, as if he was blowing the bellows. The two thieves almost cried. "What are you waiting for? Do it." The group of people finally stopped pretending to queue up, and after saying these words, a group of tigers and wolves immediately attacked. Spells, arrows, charges, and even the priest's holy light orbs, all of them bombarded Gu Fei. In the end, Gu Fei took half a step back and gently closed the door. A violent vibration came from Gu Fei's hand that was holding the doorknob. One could imagine how much impact the door had received, but it was not damaged in the slightest, and Gu Fei, who was behind the door, did not receive the slightest bit of damage. The defense of this kind of cover made all the exquisite equipment in the game pale in comparison. Gu Fei let go of the door, jumped down the stairs, and with a wave of his hand, a wall of electricity had already formed close to the wall. At the same time, the door was pulled open by the group of angry ambushers. Gu Fei looked to the left and right, and saw the two thieves from before. The two of them were ready to jump out of the door, but with a pung sound, they were embedded in the wall of electricity. The electricity flickered, and they couldn't help but tremble. The one on the left couldn't even hold the dagger in his hand, and it fell to the ground. Gufei shook his head. Today these two people were really unlucky. They really couldn't avoid it. As he thought about it, Gufei had already turned around and ran away. From the start, he didn't plan on fighting with the other party in the room. The space in the room was limited, and a few mages' spells could cover the entire area. In that kind of situation, no matter how good one's skills were, there was nowhere to hide. Gufei pushed the door open, thinking that if there was a suitable opportunity, he would accept a quest and run away. Although the two thieves on the left and right side of the door had been miserably played by Gufei, the other party's arrangements were very thorough. This could be seen from the positions of their people. Thus, Gufei didn't engage in too much entanglement. After a slight provocation, he swaggered off. When the time effect of the wall of electricity disappeared, Gufei had already turned a corner and disappeared. Since he couldn't do any wanted quests, Gufei immediately discovered that he didn't know what to do. Kill monsters to level up? It seemed like that was the only way. As Gufei thought about it, he pulled over a player beside him and asked about the location of Linshui City's level 50 leveling area. Level 50? That player looked at Gufei in astonishment, and at the same time, secretly used Identify on Gufei. At present, those who could fight monsters 10 levels higher than them were all very strong parties. Solo players could at most fight monsters 3 to 5 levels higher than them. This guy in front of him was alone, yet he opened his mouth and asked about level 50. What kind of concept was this? This person was very curious, but he didn't say anything. He only looked at the time and said, "The ship to the level 50 leveling area has probably already left. It will only arrive in an hour. You also need to take a ship to the leveling area?" Gufei's mouth was wide open. Gufei's first question was such a basic question. This player had already guessed that he was from outside the city. At this moment, when these words came out of his mouth, he no longer had any doubts. He patiently said, "Can't you see that our Linshui city is surrounded by water? The leveling areas are all small islands on the surface of the water. At fixed times, there are ships at the pier that go to the leveling areas. So if you want to level in Linshui city, you have to grasp the time." "So troublesome," Gufei muttered. "Don't the players think of their own ways? In the beginning, I heard that there were people who made their own ships, but they were often stolen or damaged by others. There's no helping it. Those things can't be put in a pocket. In fact, every leveling area has a ship every hour. As long as you pay attention to the time, it's not troublesome. You'll get used to it." So gradually people stopped making ships. Oh, Gufei finally understood the customs of Linshui City. After saying goodbye to this person, Gufei headed towards the pier. Since he couldn't go to the level 50 leveling area, he would see if there were any other leveling areas. Since there were ships, he didn't need to look for them himself. As Gufei thought about it, he suddenly felt that Yu Tianxinming's life in this place was actually very good. Once he went out, he didn't need to find his own way. There would be ships that would send him to the accurate and suitable leveling area. Once he was done, there would be ships to pick him up again. For a person with no sense of direction, this was really too convenient. Butterfly knot. I've been writing for the past 2 days and have gradually found the mood. But next month, I have to go back to Beijing again. Don't tell me I have to choose another place? Chapter 363. Gufei didn't know where the pier was. When they came over, they drove their own boat directly onto the beach. After that, they fled in panic to avoid being surrounded by onlookers. From what he remembered, there didn't seem to be a pier nearby. Thus Gufei asked around as he walked. Twice, he was targeted by the guards because he wasn't familiar with the city. However, because his PK value was less than 30, he only attracted a few fixed guards. As long as he escaped a certain distance, they wouldn't bother him anymore. For Gufei, who had teleportation, this wasn't difficult. Along the way, Gufei finally arrived at the official pier of Waterside City. The pier was very big and had several berths. Some had ships docked and players were boarding the ships. Some had no ships and no people. Some had no ships, but there were many players waiting, presumably because the ships were about to arrive. There were even some ships that had just left the shore. There were a few players who didn't make it to the ship and were jumping and cursing at the berths. However, this was what a pier should be like. Gu Fei didn't care. What really surprised him was that this wasn't just a pier, but a large-scale market. The sky was blue, the water was blue, and the breeze was often mixed with water droplets. The golden beach beside the pier was clearly divided into many areas. The left side was obviously the trading area. Many players set up stalls here and made full use of the richest resource here, sand. Everyone piled the sand into all kinds of strange shapes, and then placed the equipment they wanted to sell on them to attract the attention of others. The most amazing thing was that there was a person who piled the sand into a model as tall as a person, wearing clothes and carrying a sword. Not to mention the stats of the equipment, at least the appearance was obvious and attracted the attention of countless people. This person's business was also very prosperous. The Sandman model's clothes were sold and worn again, and when he was free, he would make new models. Such a wonderful idea was only envied by the surrounding players who were selling goods. No one tried to imitate him. Obviously, the person who piled the models must have used some special method or technique that others wanted to learn, but didn't know the trick. The left side was mainly for trading, while the right side was for leisure. There were actually round tables and wooden stools on the beach. Of course, the chairs weren't for free. These were all player-owned open-air taverns. There were also players guarding the liquor cabinets nearby, selling alcohol to the visiting players. This method was obviously more profitable than Little Ray's bar. Little Ray had invested quite a lot in the system's big house alone. After that, he had to go through the formal route to apply to the system to open a shop. In this way, the system would record it and deduct a certain amount of money from the turnover every day. This was called tax by the players. Moreover, the system was truly despicable. It was not ashamed of the players' mockery. Instead, it was proud of it. Seeing that more and more players were starting to open up shop, the system actually started a daily activity of judging the merchant that paid the most taxes as the star of tax payment. The rewards were so great that the players who opened shops had to wake up early and work late. They competed with each other and suppressed each other, creating a foul atmosphere. Of course, a regular merchant like Little Ray also had the advantages of a regular merchant. For example, if you took the alcohol but didn't pay, he could summon the system guards with a text message. After all, his shop was registered in the system. During transactions, if someone took the alcohol but didn't pay, the system would be able to check. It wasn't that he only believed Little Ray's side of the story. However, he gave the right to call for help to the boss. After all, sometimes the boss would treat his friends to a free drink or two. If the system guards came to take the people away, it would be too much of a letdown. Compared to Little Ray, the players in front of him couldn't possibly pay taxes to the system. Naturally, they wouldn't receive the system's protection. What if a strong person came to eat for free? Even if the boss was a peerless master, he couldn't afford to offend a guild that came to visit. As Gu Fei admired the scenery, he began to worry about the bosses. However, when he walked closer and looked at the signboards on the liquor cabinets, he finally understood. These open-air, non-system-operated taverns didn't have any individual business. They were all owned by guilds. The most eye-catching position on the liquor cabinets clearly indicated that they belonged to a certain guild. This was enough of a deterrent. If you wanted to be hunted down by the entire guild, then come eat and dash. There were many people in this open-air tavern. Compared to the indoor tavern that Gu Fei and the others usually stayed in, this place naturally had a different flavor. Gu Fei felt that it was interesting as he walked around. For a moment, he forgot that he was going to farm monsters and level up. He began to look around for an empty spot, wanting to experience it. This action was immediately noticed by an experienced player who was selling alcohol. He took out the enthusiasm of a boss and rushed over. "Brother, do you want to find a place to sit?" "Yes." Gu Fei nodded. Here. There's still space here." "How many people?" the other person asked. "One." Gu Fei said. "Big Ben, one person. Give me a small table." The player turned around and shouted, "Coming." A warrior who was squatting beside the liquor cabinet stood up and walked over. With a whoosh, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small round table that looked like a bedside table. He then took a stool from the side and placed it in place. Sit. How much weight do you carry? Gu Fei sat down dumbfounded. The warrior smiled honestly and returned to his original spot to squat and play with the sand again. Brother, what would you like to order? The serving player reached out and actually handed over a wine list. Gu Fei looked up. The wine was still the same, but the price was even more expensive than a regular store like Little Ray's Bar, which had to pay taxes. It seemed that this place didn't just sell alcohol, but also this special atmosphere. Gu Fei sighed inwardly. At the same time, he secretly glanced around, trying to see what other players wanted. At a glance, he found that although the environment had changed, the players' consumption concept was still the same. Most of the drinks were still cheap. Just as Gu Fei was about to order a serving, he suddenly found that there was a single table that was the same as his, with 2 bottles of the most expensive 200 yuan. Someone who would drink this kind of wine. Gu Fei looked up and sure enough, Han family young master was sitting there with a glass of wine in his hand. The difference was that everyone who drank here would look around and feel the atmosphere while drinking. Only this guy's attention was completely focused on the glass in his hand. Excuse me. Gu Fei suddenly stood up. I have a friend over there. I'll go sit with him. Where? The serving player looked displeased. After all, he had specially opened a special table for Gu Fei. There. After Gu Fei pointed, the player's face revealed an ecstatic expression. Why? Because the person sitting at that table was Han family young master. Han family young master's wine was expensive, fast, and in large quantities. This kind of customer was the favorite of the hotel owner. Now that Gu Fei was this person's friend, wouldn't he drink faster and more if he went over to help him consume more of his wine? It should be known that a single glass of this kind of wine was worth many glasses of the cheapest wine. Moreover, this guy actually wanted it by the bottle. The player's attitude suddenly became enthusiastic again. He rushed over to help Gu Fei place the chair in front of Han family young master's table. Han family young master finally stopped paying attention to his glass of wine. He turned his head and saw Gu Fei behind the player. Without saying a word, he turned his head back and continued to pay attention to his glass of wine. The serving player was puzzled. Han family young master's attitude was like he was looking at a mass of air. Gu Fei didn't mind. He patted that person and said, "Get me a glass of wine." After saying that, he sat down. That person immediately reached into his pocket and took out the biggest wine glass he had for Gu Fei. It was so big that even Han family young master's calm face showed a trace of surprise. The player's eyes flashed with a hint of slyness. He patted Gu Fei's shoulder intimately and said, "Enjoy your drink." Gu Fei nodded and ignored Han family young master's expression. He took the wine bottle and poured a full glass of wine. The glass was indeed big. After one glass, half of the bottle was gone. Gu Fei held the glass and felt very satisfied. Before he could take a sip, someone flashed to Gu Fei's side and lowered his head to ask, "Brother, do you want some roasted fish?" Roasted fish? Gu Fei was surprised. That person turned around and pointed. Gu Fei looked over and saw that in an awkward part of the beach, there were piles of bonfires on the ground. Smoke curled up from the chimneys. Many players were squatting in front of the bonfires with sticks in their hands. Most of the sticks were pierced with fish. As they roasted the fish, they looked at the wine stall to see if there were any new customers. A few of them looked regretful that Gu Fei had been robbed first. Chef Proficiency 2700. I guarantee you will be satisfied. The player continued to recommend himself. How much? A one fish or a skewer? Gu Fei asked. One fish is a skewer. The player replied. But we all call it a stick. All the fish are the same size? Gu Fei suddenly became curious and gossipy. They are all farmed by the system. I guarantee that they are the same size. The player replied confidently. How much? 5 gold coins. That's quite expensive. Gu Fei was speechless. As a matter of fact, Cloud City hadn't developed its food industry yet. The other main cities were just passing by. Even if there were, they wouldn't know about it. Therefore, Gu Fei didn't understand the market. That's the price. The player said. Then let's try 2 sticks first. Gu Fei said. Okay. That person quickly nodded and ran away as fast as he could. Not long after, he returned with 2 sticks in his hands. There were 2 fish pierced on the sticks. To be honest, it was very crude. However, there was a sense of wildness in it. Gu Fei looked at the fish and felt that it was very tempting. After paying the gold coins, Gu Fei took the fish and 1 stick and handed it to the Han family young master. The Han family young master was raising his wine glass and slowly shook his head. Try it. Gu Fei had already tasted it and felt that it was very good. He strongly recommended it. I have eaten 6 sticks. The Han family young master said as he tapped the ground with his feet. Gu Fei looked down and saw the sticks on the ground. He was shocked and said, You can eat and drink. Are you a good-for-nothing? The Han family young master's expression turned cold. He coldly reminded, The wine you drank is mine. Yes. Gu Fei quickly nodded and drank a mouthful. At this moment, a shout suddenly came. Look, it's that guy. Chapter 364. Gu Fei held a stick of fish in his left hand and a glass of wine in his right. When he heard the shout, he turned his head and looked over. At the same time, he gulped down the wine and chewed the fish. He looked much better than the Han family young master. The Han family young master also turned his head and looked at the source of the shout. He glanced at the group of people and looked back at Gu Fei. Are they looking for you? Probably. Gu Fei mumbled without opening his mouth. He rubbed a fishbone between his lips and put down the wine glass with his right hand. Then he didn't take the wine glass. Instead, he took out the night streamer. There weren't many people here. There were only 6 of them. Therefore, Gu Fei didn't care about his safety at all. He was only concerned about his PK points being 29. He didn't want to get involved. Therefore, he wanted this group of people to retreat in the face of difficulties. This was more troublesome than killing them instantly. The 6 people walked over quickly. As Gu Fei ate the fish, he was ready to fight. He didn't have any intention of being careless. Unexpectedly, when the 6 people were halfway through, the 2 players who were moving the tables walked up to them. Do you know the rules? Of course we do. One of the 6 people smiled. But we're just walking around and not fighting. I don't think we're breaking any rules, right? Hearing this, the 2 players hesitated for a moment before moving aside. However, they still stared at the 6 people. As expected, the 6 people walked toward Gu Fei. Many players around them noticed the 6 people's overbearing aura and looked over. Gu Fei and the Han family young master heard the conversation between the 6 people and the 2 people. There seemed to be a tacit understanding between them. As 2 outsiders, they naturally didn't know what was going on. However, there was no need to make wild guesses. Gu Fei moved closer to the 2 players sitting next to each other and asked, Brother, what kind of rules were they talking about? The 2 players were quite surprised. At a time like this person wasn't hurrying to escape, but was still inquiring about the inside of this place. However, even though they were surprised, they still explained it to Gu Fei. The answer was similar to what Gu Fei and the Han family young master had guessed. It was because this place was opened by a guild. In layman's terms, it was protected by the guild. Even those who tried to dine and dash would not be tolerated, let alone a fight that affected the business. So if I sit here and don't leave, they won't make a move, right? Gu Fei asked. This should be it. When the 2 of them heard that Gu Fei seemed to have such a plan, they were even more surprised. Even if this place could be regarded as a PK safe zone, it wasn't a safe zone for going offline. How long are you going to sit there? When Gu Fei received the answer, he felt relieved. He turned around and put away the night streak sword. He picked up his wine glass and said to the Han family young master, It's fine. They have people up there. After saying that, he ate a mouthful of fish, drank a mouthful of wine, and continued to enjoy himself. The Han family young master only raised his eyebrows. He didn't say anything and continued to drink his wine. In the blink of an eye, the 6 players arrived in front of the 2 players' table. Originally, they had planned to aggressively charge over with a clear goal in mind. Gu Fei would definitely turn tail and run. Then, they would have to chase after him. Once he was out of the area protected by the guild, they would be able to do whatever they wanted. Who would have thought that Gu Fei would be completely indifferent? This caused the 6 players to be at a loss. They couldn't just stand in front of the 2 players' table and not make a move. What made them even more annoyed was that the 2 players at the table completely ignored the 6 of them. Those who were drinking drank, and those who were eating fish ate fish. From time to time, they would raise their heads to look at the glaring sunlight in the sky. In any case, they couldn't see the 6 players. "Hey brother, if there's nothing else, can you move aside?" One of them couldn't hold it in and spoke to the Han family young master. His intention was to clear the area and create some pressure for Gu Fei. "I'm busy." The Han family young master didn't move from his seat. His words made the other party swallow his words. Although the 6 of them were furious, they couldn't do anything to the Han family young master. Truth be told, the Han family young master and Gu Fei were sitting at the same table. However, they couldn't tell if the 2 of them knew each other. The 2 of them didn't seem to be communicating with each other at all. They were completely minding their own business. Therefore, the 6 of them could only focus on Gu Fei. They stared at him and said, "Hey, let's talk somewhere else." Gu Fei had already finished his fish stick, but he still had 1 stick left. He raised his fish stick and looked at the 6 of them. What is there to talk about? The 6 of them were speechless. Frankly speaking, they weren't here to talk. They were here to fight. However, why was the person they met so untactful today? Moreover, they couldn't use force to solve the problem in this place. Otherwise, there would be endless trouble. The 6 of them weren't good with words. Their usual greetings were cut short. Since they couldn't fight, they didn't know what to say. "Call for help. This guy is acting shamelessly. It's not good for us to fight. Since he likes to drag it out, let him drag it out. Let's call more people to guard this place so that he won't be able to leave even if he wants to." The 6 of them began to communicate privately. "Let's do this." Therefore, the 6 of them began to call for their friends who were online. They stood beside the table where Gu Fei and the others were. This amusing standoff caused the surrounding players who were drinking to laugh. However, this also showed how safe this beach was. In reality, not every guild had their own area on the beach. In this territory, they were a small alliance. Players who caused trouble here would be ganged up on by a few guilds. After killing the chicken to warn the monkey, all the players in Linshui City saw the determination of these guilds. No one dared to cause trouble here again. After a short while, Gu Fei finished his 2nd fish stick. He raised his head and said, "You guys haven't left yet." Brat, don't pretend to be calm. Don't even think of leaving here today." Someone replied. "Who said I want to leave?" Gu Fei said as he waved his hand and asked for another 2 fish sticks. The fish came quickly and the aroma filled the air. Gu Fei keenly heard the sound of the 6 of them swallowing their saliva. At this moment, the Han family young master suddenly raised his head and looked at the 6 of them. "When will the people you called for arrive?" The 6 of them were in a daze. After a while, they finally believed that the Han family young master was talking to them. Naturally, they were shocked. How did he know that they had already called for reinforcements? However, they didn't know that their reactions made the Han family young master even more confident in his deduction. The 6 of them stood there stupidly. They didn't say anything and didn't leave. From time to time, their faces would reveal expressions of confidence. He guessed that they had called for reinforcements in order to prevent Gu Fei from escaping. Therefore, he gave them a simple test. The expressions of the 6 of them immediately betrayed them. "Tell your people to hurry up. Otherwise, it won't be fun anymore." Han family young master continued. The 6 of them were already dumbfounded. Was the other party deliberately mystifying things, or did he really have a big move? The 6 of them hoped to find some clues from the 2's expressions. In the end, they only saw one of them focused on drinking while the other focused on eating fish. From this simple conversation, they could only come to one conclusion. The Han family young master and Gu Fei were friends. "This person isn't from our Linshui city, right?" The 6 of them began to discuss in private. "I don't think so. I've never seen such a person before." Someone replied. "I've never seen him before either." The remaining people expressed their opinions one after another. "Moreover, I've never heard of him before." Someone added. Of course, The Han family young master belonged to the category of people who had an unforgettable memory. Moreover, it was very special. This kind of person, as long as any gossipy person had seen him before, it would quickly spread throughout the entire city. Cloud City was like this. There was a male priest who looked like this. TSK, have you seen him before? This saying had been circulating since the beginning of Cloud City, until now. However, there had never been such a rumor in Linshui City. Therefore, the 6 of them came to an accurate conclusion. The Han family young master definitely wasn't a person from Linshui City. At this time, Gu Fei's 2 new sticks of fish were finished. Gu Fei realized that it wasn't difficult to finish 6 fish. He guessed that this was the work of the game system. In order to promote the consumption of food, it made everyone a big eater in terms of stomach capacity. However, because he had mocked the Han family young master with 6 fish, he had to control himself. At this time, he had finished the wine in the half-filled glass. The Han family young master also took the opportunity to finish the wine in the wine bottle on the table. Suddenly, the 2 of them fell into a situation where they had nothing to do. No wonder this guy was so anxious. Why hasn't the opponent's people arrived yet? Gu Fei thought to himself as he began to look around. Is 4 fish enough? The Han family young master looked at him. Yes. Gu Fei nodded firmly. He definitely couldn't give the Han family young master a chance to mock him. The Han family young master didn't pay any more attention to him. He looked at the 6 of them, and then looked at the time. The 6 of them were elated. Gu Fei and the Han family young master followed their gaze, and saw 2 players dashing towards the pier. They were led by 2 bandits. They were the 2 bandits that Gu Fei had clipped with the door. Gu Fei couldn't help but laugh. Yet he was still able to laugh at this moment. This made the 6 of them even more confused. Gu Fei turned around and looked at the 6 of them. He continued with a smile. What are you guys so happy about? I still don't plan to leave. Since they're here, can we fight here? You want to leave? The 6 of them sneered. It was obvious that the 6 of them were much more confident after their companions arrived. Yeah, I want to leave. What are you guys going to do? Gu Fei smiled and suddenly stood up. The 6 of them were startled and quickly retreated. No one dared to fight in this place. However, they knew that Gu Fei was from another city. Perhaps he didn't know the rules here well. If he made a rash move, they might be implicated. Unexpectedly, the Han family young master suddenly said, "Don't be in such a hurry. Sit down." Ha! Gu Fei was puzzled. Open another bottle of wine. The Han family young master snapped his fingers at the wine cellar. He turned around and said to Gu Fei, "Sit down and watch the show." What show? Gu Fei knew that this guy must be up to something again. He also knew that those who were tortured by the Han family young master had a miserable ending. Gu Fei was happy to see these guys miserable. Therefore he sat down again. Chapter 365. More and more people hurried over from the main road leading to the docks. After all, every character had different movement speeds. After the 2 fastest thieves arrived, they didn't go over to Gu Fei's side. They exchanged glances with the other 6 players, and then stood outside of the circle. Moreover, they brazenly disappeared and went into stealth. Using stealth at this moment was quite useful because Gu Fei's group was the most eye-catching in the beach pub. Countless players were looking at them with their cups in their hands. Gu Fei could feel countless people paying attention to him. It wasn't easy to distinguish between these 2 thieves in stealth. However, even if he went into stealth, the opponents definitely wouldn't dare to attack Gu Fei. As a result, Gu Fei continued to calmly look at the street, counting how many people were coming for him. As he continued to look, he felt that these people were the same people he had seen in the wanted quest room. It seemed like the other side only had this many people. Even Han family young master felt disappointed. He shook his head and said, "You only have this many people." The other side coldly laughed. "What, you think it's not enough? Don't worry, just sit for a bit longer. Maybe you'll be satisfied." Han family young master smiled warmly. "Then let's sit for a bit longer." Just wait for your deaths." Although the other side said this, he couldn't help but feel a bit anxious. It was because the 2 of them were too calm. that they couldn't calm down from beginning to end. At this moment, a few players from the open-air wine stalls suddenly stood up and walked away. This scene gave the 6 players and Gu Fei a big fright. Gu Fei thought that the other side had secretly gathered so many people and was prepared to ignore the rules and force their way in. The 6 players suspected that the 2 of them had some sort of big move up their sleeves. Seeing so many people suddenly stand up, they were scared out of their wits. However, the 2 sides quickly looked at each other and saw some clues from each other's expressions. The other side had the same worries as them. It seemed like these people's actions didn't come from the other side's arrangements. At the same time, the players who had just stood up walked in a certain direction. When the 6 waterfront players looked closely, they immediately understood what was going on. They couldn't help but laugh. Gu Fei was still a little confused. After observing for a while, he finally understood. It turned out that there was a boat coming back from the docks, and these people were obviously going to take this boat to the leveling area. Since they had arrived a little early, they decided to sit in the open-air tavern for a while. The open-air tavern wouldn't have done so well just because of the scenery. It was because of the pier. Gu Fei felt relieved and relaxed again. However, when he looked at the 6 of them, they didn't just feel relieved. They even looked excited. This made Gu Fei feel a little strange. He then looked at the Han family young master and found that he was also very satisfied. The ship drew nearer and nearer to the pier. It was also a sailboat, but this one could be considered a giant ship. It was many times larger than the one Gu Fei had taken from the system guards. Gu Fei didn't know if a sailboat could be this big, but he didn't have any reason to argue with the system. Moreover, this ship was also for the players. Naturally, the bigger the better. If it was only able to carry 100 people, the players of Waterfront City would definitely revolt. Such a small ship wouldn't be able to satisfy the traffic needs of Waterfront City. At this moment, the ship gradually came to a stop. A wide and long wooden plank was placed on the ship. Immediately, a surging tide of people surged out of the ship and headed straight for the beach. The density of the crowd made Gu Fei feel like he was watching a war movie. After a long time on the ship, the players of Waterfront City had developed a good habit of disembarking first, then boarding first. In the game, everyone sat wherever they wanted, so there was no such thing as stealing seats. The order was maintained very well. After this crowd of people disembarked, they spread out on the beach. Those who obtained something valuable, while leveling up, turned around and walked towards the trade area on the left. Those who made new friends while leveling up called their friends over and found seats in the open-air tavern. For a time, the entire beach was bustling with activity. Many players who were selling equipment or alcohol took the initiative to attract customers. Even the hawker players who had been squatting in front of their bonfires at the edge of the beach stood up and shouted loudly. The content of their shouts was full of the game's characteristics. Hey, high-quality roasted fish worth 3,000 gold. 1 rod is only 4.5 gold. Cheap. My fish was too expensive. Gu Fei was indignant. He bought fish for 5 gold per rod, but his chef mastery was only 2,700 gold. When the commotion died down and everyone returned to their respective positions, Gu Fei discovered that there were even more players staring at the 2 of them, both inside and outside the circle. You should be satisfied this time. The 6 people laughed in delight. It turned out that some of their companions had gone to level up. It was a pity that the players who were leveling up in Waterfront City couldn't be called upon and had to wait for the ship. Thus, when the ship that was returning from the level 40 leveling area reached the shore, they had a large group of people. Gu Fei swept his eyes around. The other party was at most a level 5 mercenary group with at most 100 people. If he used teleportation and ran like crazy, it shouldn't be difficult for him to escape. If he really couldn't shake them off, then he would be forced to kill them. Although it was very difficult to get around 30 PK, since the other party had given him face, he could only reluctantly do it. As Gu Fei thought of this, his expression naturally remained calm. Not only that, because there was a high possibility that he would be forced to attack, Gu Fei even faintly revealed an expression of excitement. Not allowing the PK to reach 30, this was the requirement that Gu Fei had set for himself. However, To be honest, he was naturally very annoyed by this restriction. Now that he was forced to break this restriction, it was equivalent to giving Gu Fei a sufficient reason to break the rule that he had set for himself. At this moment, after admiring the group of people, the Han family young master nodded his head and said, "There are quite a lot of people. How is it? Are you satisfied?" The other party provoked. "To be honest, I'm not very satisfied," the Han family young master said as he slowly stood up. "However, I'm a very honest person. Isn't it just a matter of having more people to bully? I will make you very satisfied." After saying this, the Han family young master straightened his arm and waved his hand. Everyone looked towards the direction where he waved. There was a large group of people in that direction. A large group of people who had just gotten off the ship. They didn't follow the main road back to the city, didn't go to the trading point, didn't come to drink, and didn't even eat grilled fish. They seemed like a group of people who were thinking about what to do next. It was rare for so many people to hesitate after getting off the ship. This was because this kind of question was enough for one to think about it 180 times during the boring time on the ship. Gu Fei also looked at this group of people, and he saw countless familiar faces. The people of Cloud City. The players of Cloud City were squirming in their direction. With so many people, it wasn't easy for them to travel through the food stalls, so they walked very slowly. However, their target was very clear. It was the direction where Gu Fei and the Han family young master were. As a result, the 6 people's mouths opened wider and wider. The people who were called over to surround Gu Fei and the Han family young master also felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over them. Their mouths opened wider and wider. Did they call these people over? These people discussed in their channel. Impossible, the two of them aren't people of Linshui City. How could they gather so many people in Linshui City? Someone said. Looking at the slowly approaching group of people, no matter what, they should be from a rank 5 guild. Could it be that the two of them know one of the bosses of Linshui City? Someone guessed. Bullshit, if that's the case, there would already be people covering for them at the wine stall. To be able to occupy a golden area by the pier and open a wine stall, there was no doubt that it was one of the most powerful guilds in Linshui City. If Gu Fei and the Han family young master really had a relationship with one of the big guilds here, then they must be one of the people who opened a wine stall here. After all, there weren't that many rank 5 guilds. In fact, this group of people had already calculated this. They believed that Gu Fei and the Han family young master were 2 outsiders who didn't have any background in the city. That was why they acted so brazenly, surrounding the most flourishing area. Unexpectedly, the other party actually had such a large group of people. It can't be fake, right? Someone was still fantasizing. However, at this moment, the group of people had already arrived in front of them. They waved their hands and greeted the Han family young master. "Are you guys still not going to leave?" Han family young master indifferently said as he looked at the 6 people still standing by his table. The 6 people looked at each other in dismay. They came menacingly and left in a hurry. Wasn't this too shameful? How many players had been eyeing this wine stall, and now? However, to some players, levels were insignificant, but face was more important. For this group of players who prioritized profit over prestige, levels were the most important thing. Moreover, they still had the words left behind by their ancestors to use as an excuse. Thus, everyone muttered in the chat. A wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. And left with their tails between their legs. Subduing the enemy without fighting, that's the highest level, do you see? Han family young master said to Gu Fei. How boring. Gu Fei felt regretful that he still had to follow the rule of not being able to kill more than 30 people. At this moment, Unsworn Sword had already led his people to their table. Only now did he see that Gu Fei was also here. He was overjoyed. Brother Qianli is here too, that's great. Gu Fei was quite surprised. Recently, he had been communicating with the system guards and hadn't had a direct conversation with this boss in a long time. Why was he suddenly so enthusiastic towards him? When did this person succumb to the Han family's young master without a fight? Gu Fei thought. Looking at the crowd again, people like Sword Demon and Yutian Shunming also squeezed out to greet Gu Fei and Unsworn Sword. Obviously, These people were all around level 40. If they wanted to level up, they would of course take the same boat to the same place. At night, everyone would set off together at the same time, so naturally they would take the same boat back. This wasn't a coincidence, it was inevitable. How is it? Boss Unsworn, is everyone here? Han family young master asked Unsworn Sword. Almost, but don't worry, they're all online. They're all in the city and on the way to the pier. They won't miss the boat. Everyone rest here for a bit. Unsworn Sword's last sentence was shouted at everyone behind him. Chapter 366. The cloud computing players suffered a heavy blow in Shady Forest City. Although the players of Unhindered couldn't start over after dying, the players of the mercenary groups had to come back after dying. Although there were a few mercenary groups that felt that there was no profit to be made, the ones that would do this weren't big mercenary groups. For example, the Black Hand mercenary group was still around. Although they didn't have the grandeur of a 1,000-man team, the total number of people still reached the scale of a level 5 guild. With such a large group of people suddenly coming to this wine stall to relax, all the businessmen were overjoyed. However, the problem was that there simply weren't enough seats. Amidst the shouts of "Boss, are there any seats?" all the people setting up the stall had tears streaming down their cheeks. The fat meat was right in front of their mouths, but they couldn't eat it. This was too painful. Fortunately, the players of Cloud Peak City were already preparing to set off. They were too lazy to leave the docks, so they just sat there for a while. For example, the table that Gu Fei and the young master of the Han family were sitting at was originally a single-person table. At this moment, there were 8 people surrounding it. The wine glasses on the table were arranged as if they were having a get-together. There were people constantly being reprimanded for taking the wrong glass. This was already considered good. At least there were benches to sit on and a table to place glasses on. Most of the cloud computing players directly sat on the beach, holding their wine glasses in their hands. When the businessmen of Waterfront City saw that these fellows actually didn't mind not having a seat, they were naturally elated. They happily served wine, expressed their apologies, and attached a portion of the discount. For a time, the atmosphere was joyous and harmonious. At Gu Fei's table, apart from Gu Fei and the 6 people from the child elite group, there were also Unsworn Sword and Fengxing. Gu Fei was a bit confused. Why did this Unsworn Sword suddenly like to poke into their group? Gu Fei raised this question in the mercenary channel. The Han family young master smiled darkly and said, "Subduing the enemy without fighting. Didn't I teach you?" Gu Fei cursed in his heart and quickly closed the channel. At this time, the leaders of the Han family young master and Oathless Sword had already begun their discussion. "How was it? Did you discover anything with Jian Nanyu yesterday?" asked the Han family young master. "Jian Nanyu? One of the 5 experts? Is he in Linshui City?" Gu Fei asked in surprise. Everyone looked at him strangely. "You know each other?" Gu Fei continued to ask. "Well, he's a friend of mine," said Brother Yu. "How are your skills?" Gu Fei asked Brother Yu. "Well, I'm no match for you," said Brother Yu. "How would you know if you haven't tried?" Gu Fei's eyes shone. "I tried." Brother Yu nodded and said, "Didn't you do a wanted mission last night?" He was the one who cooperated with the guards to clean up the mess. Gu Fei was in a daze. Of course, he wouldn't forget such a person so quickly. It was just that it was such a coincidence that he was surprised. On the other side, the Han family young master no longer paid attention to him, and continued to ask Oathless Sword the same question. Oathless Sword was extremely excited as he said, "Brother Han, this time, it's all thanks to you for suggesting to meet this big shot. Last night, after Jian Nanyu came out, I immediately contacted him. Then he brought me to the wanted mission office to ask around. Sure enough. Fucking system, there's another 2-way mission in Linshui City. However, we were lucky this time. The one who took the mission was a small rank 3 guild. Afterwards, Jian Nanyu brought me along to pay a visit. In order to save face, the other party directly gave up on the mission. Haha, we're too lucky." "If that's the case, then there won't be another mission like this, right?" asked Brother Yu. "No, after that brother gave up on the mission, I immediately went to take a look at the mission office. It didn't appear again. Afterwards, I even took turns to keep an eye on it with a few brothers. It definitely didn't appear again. Ofla's sword said with satisfaction. So this Linshui city trial was passed so easily? Everyone felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. Of course. Ofla's sword said as he lifted his leg and kicked someone beside him. Didn't nothing happen when I led this guy to level? Ha 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 ha. When Ofla's sword was complacent, his loathsome aura once again appeared. The 6 of them ignored him. They looked at the guy who didn't react at all after he kicked him. It was actually Todd. You're quite daring. You just brought him to level like this? Brother, you said. In the beginning, I only wanted to try it out. In the end, the more I tried, the safer it became. This is enough to prove that there's no more suspense in Linshui City. Ofla's sword said. The more he spoke, the more excited he became. Actually, the other party is just an ordinary rank 3 guild. They can't compare to Deepwater's group in Shady Forest City. If they really want to make things difficult for us, they don't have enough strength. Since someone accepted the mission, why didn't anything happen when we arrived here yesterday? Brother Yu expressed his puzzlement. It's all thanks to this place's special environment. Han Family Young Master said. We came here on the system's passenger ship. Even if the other party has the system's information, what ability do they have to intercept the system's large ship on the water? You guys have also seen this side of the pier. If they want a group fight here, it's a dead end. This is the area enveloped by the strongest forces in Linshui City. After that, we'll enter the city and turn around and we'll reach the dungeon. It's close, really close. How could they have the opportunity to attack? Brother Han's analysis is correct. Ofla's sword was full of praise. After praising them, he looked at the time and frowned. It's almost time to set sail. After saying this, he turned back to look at the road leading to the city gate. His brows immediately relaxed. At this time, the players who stayed in Cloud City had already arrived. Brothers, it's almost time. Ofla's sword fiercely stood up and shouted in a grand manner. The Cloud City players who were sitting on the ground heard his shout, and stood up one after another. Under the countless gazes of strangers, Ofla's sword felt that he was in a daze and wanted to say a few more words. However, the next step was to board the ship. There was no need for any major mobilization. For a moment he couldn't form any words. In the end he only shouted, "Everyone prepare to board the ship." Everyone raised their cups and drank it in one gulp. Then they turned around and walked towards the pier. As for which pier they should go to, they had already investigated and informed everyone. We're leaving just like that? It's not even 7 o'clock yet, Gu Fei said. There's no other way. This place is special. The ship doesn't wait for people. Brother Yu patted him. This ship was carrying players out of Linshui City. It had long since docked at the pier. There didn't seem to be any passengers on board. This wasn't strange. Players rarely moved between the main cities of the parallel world. Therefore, the business of this giant ferry couldn't be compared to the business of the leveling area. The players lined up and paid the fee to the NPC at the pier before boarding the ship one after another. When Gu Fei boarded the ship, he scanned the observation deck and the cockpit. He discovered that the NPCs were directly in charge of the ship. It was unknown how many times the players of Cloud City had boarded the ship. They seemed to be very familiar with the route. After boarding the ship, they immediately formed their own groups and divided their territories. Some drank, some chatted, some played cards, and some even brought back grilled fish. This was Gu Fei's first time. Thinking about Shi Xiaotian and Boundless Mang, who traveled with him yesterday, it should also be their first time. He subconsciously searched the crowd, but to no avail. There were simply too many people. It wasn't easy to find the 2 players. The only thing Gu Fei could confirm was that the 2 players were online, so they should be on the ship. After looking around, Gu Fei still didn't see anything. He was too lazy to send any messages to ask, so he found a place to sit down. After everyone boarded the ship, it stopped for another 10 minutes. The ship began to slowly leave the shore. Gu Fei heard Unsworn Sword bragging again. Haha, how was it? I calculated it perfectly. I didn't waste anyone's time, right? The target of Unsworn Sword's bragging was his favorite mercenary group leader, Gu Xiaoshang. "Can't you be quiet?" Gu Xiaoshang said as he turned his head to the side. Unsworn Sword immediately quieted down. In an instant, he had turned from a powerful guild leader to a lackey among the masses. Gu Fei couldn't help but laugh. At this moment, on the golden beach of Waterside City, a person with a shield on his back and a long sword at his waist stood with his arms crossed in front of his chest. He quietly watched as the ship slowly left the dock. The azure seawater continuously slapped against his feet, but he didn't feel it at all. Behind him, there were people pointing at him from time to time in the bustling wine stalls. "Danan!" At this moment, a few players ran to the shore and called out to him. Qin and Yu turned around. There were 6 players behind him. They were the 6 most elite players among his companions. "Has his identity been confirmed?" one of them asked. "He's a video mage," Qin and Yu replied. "What about his equipment?" another person asked. "It's as the report said. We can't identify him," Qin and Yu said. "High-level equipment? Definitely. No wonder the bounty is so high. But," another person said hesitantly, "he's a friend of your friend." "Friends are friends, business is business," Qin and Yu said calmly. "Then why don't we take action in Waterside City?" another person said. "Are you crazy? Don't you see how many people they have?" Qin and Yu said. "Then what do we do?" "Get on the next boat and follow them to the next stop," Qin and Yu said. "That's their last stop. Whether they complete or fail the mission, it's time for them to disband." "The last stop? How do you know? Have you contacted the informant in their team?" another person asked. Qin and Yu nodded. "When?" "Last night. I've already understood the general situation," Qin and Yu said. "So we can also clearly grasp the movements of the video mage?" "That's right. But if we wait for the next boat, won't it be too late? Since it's the last stage, they can complete the mission as soon as they get off the boat. There's no need to wait until tomorrow, right?" Qin and Yu smiled. "Don't worry, how can the last stage's mission be so easy to complete? Butterfly knot. The Burning Crusade has finally reached the last stage, can we clear it?" Chapter 367. Is this a guess, or do you have any accurate information? Someone asked. The last stage of the game was often the most difficult, so it was normal to make such a deduction. Jiannan nodded and said, "There is information." "Is it also provided by an informant?" someone asked. "No, they don't know what they are facing in the last stage. Even I only received the news after they left the shore," Jiannan said. "What news?" The moment they left the shore, a new mercenary mission appeared in their next stop, the mercenary building in Sunset City. The content is to assassinate the target they are protecting, Jiannan said. "Mercenary mission? These guys have more people than a 5th-rank guild. How can a mercenary group contend against them?" Someone was puzzled. Jiannan smiled and said, "This is an indiscriminate mercenary mission." Everyone said, "Oh." They were also very familiar with mercenary missions. There were 2 characteristics of indiscriminate mercenary missions. One was that there were no requirements for the mercenary group that accepted the mission. The second was that there was no limit to the number of mercenary groups that accepted the mission. However, in the end, only one person could complete the mission, and only one person could obtain the reward. Therefore, there was competition. This kind of mission could be said to be a two-way street. In theory, it could cause hundreds of mercenary groups to fight each other. However, the rules were dead, and people were alive. Every time this kind of rare mission appeared, experienced mercenary groups would not waste their energy on internal strife. Generally, there would be a few relatively strong mercenary groups forming an alliance to take the lead in the competition. After completing the mission, they would divide the reward. This kind of mission had extremely high rewards. Moreover, the rewards of mercenary missions had always been transparent. When receiving the mission, one would know what the reward was, so there was no need to worry about the mercenary group that completed the mission. Even so, I don't know how many mercenary groups will join hands, and whether they can form such a large army. There were still people who were worried. Don't forget about Sunset City's 100 Battles mercenary group, Jiannan said. The 100 Realms mercenary group. Someone had already begun to suck in a breath of cold air. Although this 100 Battles mercenary group's fame had not yet spread throughout the parallel world, as a neighbor of Sunset City, they had heard of it. Of course, he didn't know much about the details. He only knew that this mercenary group was extremely powerful. It was said that this group of people were really good at fighting. Some said they were a bunch of hooligans, some said they were a group of martial arts dojos, and some said they were retired soldiers and so on. Jian Nanyu had dealt with them in the course of business. Although he didn't know where these people came from, he definitely agreed that their skills were extraordinary. Moreover, Jian Nanyu had only seen a few random people in the 100 Battles mercenary group. As for their leader, Bai Jingluan, who was also one of the 5 strongmen, he didn't dare to imagine how strong he was. Thinking about this mercenary group, South Ranger's brothers started to worry about the players in Cloud City. Such a strong opponent, they'll be dead by the time we get off work. Well, that's a problem. That guy's PK value is 29. Once he dies, he'll probably die on the spot. There's no point in us looking for him. South Sword said. Let's not wait for the ship to get off work. Let's hurry up and find a ship. We're already so far away, they shouldn't be able to see us. One person looked at the giant ship that was gradually blurring in the mist. Okay, hurry and call a ship. After Jian Nanyu said this, they hurriedly left the beach. They could take a player-made boat, but they didn't have to come to this dock. Not long after they left, the ferry from the direction of Forest Shade City docked at the dock, and a group of people got off the boat. The scene of Waterside City's dock bustling with activity attracted the attention of these outsiders. The businessmen stationed at the dock didn't know why so many outsiders had come to Waterside City in the past 2 days. Of course, they didn't want to find out. They just wanted to make a big profit from these outsiders. Waterside City's unique commercial and leisure area was generally able to stimulate the spending desire of outsiders. However, after this group of people got off the boat, they weren't in a hurry to try it out. Instead, they grabbed the Waterside City players who came up to solicit business, and asked when the ship to Sunset City would arrive. It just left. The next one will leave in about 4 hours. If you guys are waiting for the ship, why don't you come to our stall and sit for a while? This guy happened to be one of the players who opened a wine stall. After the other party asked about the situation of the ship, he lost no time in soliciting business. Is there any other way? The other party's leader asked. Occasionally, some people will use their own boats to do the ferry business. However, there are so many of you here, I'm afraid this method won't work. As this guy spoke, he counted the number of people in the other party. At a glance, he was secretly amazed. This group of people could be said to be almost entirely archers, with only a few thieves and mages sprinkled in. This kind of team was really unusual. Can we only wait here for 4 hours? The other party's leader muttered. Why don't we sit here for a while? Depth of water. Someone in the same group suggested. Many people were already eager to try the style of this beach. Depth of water. The eyes of the players who listened to the other party couldn't help but light up. This guy who led a team of archers, with a face full of dust, was one of the 5 roaches, the #1 archer in the parallel world. Depth of water? However, all of this was already in the past. Countless people were very concerned about the level rankings, and Depth's loss of a level was already a well-known secret. Of course, everyone was very curious about how such an amazing character had died. At this moment, seeing such a big shot appear in Waterside City, everyone stretched their necks to look around, whispering to each other. Then let's sit here and wait for the ship. Depth of Water helplessly spread out his hands. He first picked a random seat, but didn't buy any wine. Instead, he asked the wine seller about some of the situation in Waterside City. Oh, that big group of people? They just boarded Sunset City's ship and left. When asked about the situation of Cloud's group, the wine seller said, Damn, just a little bit more time? This system is so cheap. It deliberately made the arrival and departure times of the 2 ships a little different, making us waste time here. Bitch, 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 bitch. Depth of Water couldn't help but curse. Even if we just happened to make it, We can't possibly board the same ship as them, right? Someone reminded Depth of Water. I'm talking about the problem of the system being cheap. Isn't this the truth? Depth of Water roared. It's very cheap. Countless voices responded, and most of them were Waterside City players. Boss, you've already asked your question. What wine do you want? The wine seller said at this moment. Wine. Depth of Water's expression turned cold. I've already decided to completely quit this thing. Go ask them. Depth of Water and his group waited at the wine stall on the beach for the next ship. Jian Nan and the others went to find a few self-made boats and rowed away. The ship that Gu Fei and the others were on was still floating on the water at this time. As long as they delivered Todd to Sunset City's dungeon, the quest would be successfully completed. As the guild leader of Unsworn Sword, he couldn't hide his excitement at this moment. He rubbed against Gu Xiaoshang for a while, but didn't seem to be in a good mood. He tactfully retreated and began to wander between the mercenary groups, expressing his gratitude to the remaining mercenary groups. Because some of the mercenary groups chose to withdraw midway and return the commission, Unsworn Sword saved a lot of money. At this moment, Unsworn Sword was in a good mood and took the initiative to promise to pay more after the quest was completed. However, the reaction of the mercenary groups was mediocre. To be honest, the reasons given by the mercenary groups that withdrew were deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. No mercenary group would willingly participate in such a troublesome and dangerous quest just for a small amount of money. Everyone was thinking about the unexpected benefits that could be obtained from such a large chain of quests. In the end, they encountered a boss in the first stage. But how could a boss be split among 1,000 people? The few items that the boss dropped were all picked up by Gu Fei. In the eyes of most people, the second stage, the werewolf, was passed without much of a reward. Gu Fei, on the other hand, had obtained something from the werewolf. This was something that no one knew about. If they knew, they would be even more indignant. As for the third stage, the two-way quest became the fuse. When the mercenary groups saw that not only did they not obtain any of the rewards that they were looking forward to, but many of their companions lost levels and suffered heavy losses, some of them finally couldn't help but quit. At this time, the mercenary groups that stayed on to continue the quest were no longer fantasizing about the unexpected benefits that would come from this lousy quest. There were only those that valued their reputation, such as the Black Hand mercenary group. Those that had a bit of friendship with Unsworn Sword and didn't come here solely for the money, such as Gu Xiaoshang's mercenary group. Or those that had obtained countless benefits from this quest, such as the Child Elite group. These people weren't very interested in Unsworn Sword's promise to give more gold, and their reactions were mediocre. Unsworn Sword had been snubbed after circling around, but it didn't affect his mood much. He continued to wander around in high spirits. On the other hand, Reflection of Years, who was already in Cloud City, sent him a message worriedly. It's almost the last stage. Don't be careless. It'll be a pity if we fail at this point. Half of the journey from Waterside City to Sunset City was by water, and the other half was by land. The ship floated for about an hour, and finally reached the pier in the direction of Sunset City. This pier was more than an hour away from Sunset City, and besides this passenger ship to Waterside City, there were no other flights, so it was impossible to form a beach market like the one in Waterside City. After the group disembarked, Unsworn Sword identified the direction, and walked in the direction of Sunset City. They didn't have the slightest bit of carelessness along the way. Not long after, someone had already noticed that someone was following them. It's the players. Unsworn Sword, who received this news, felt very comforted. He was originally worried that the last stage would be some kind of NPC big boss, and if it was a super OP, they might not be able to handle it. But now that he knew that the players were moving in secret, it seemed like it was another two-way quest like the previous two stages. The stage in Shady Forest City was only because the special environment created a group of special jungle killers, which made the players in Cloud City suffer a great loss. If it was just a direct confrontation between guilds under normal circumstances, the players in Cloud City were more than level 5 guilds. Now that it was the last stage, there was no need to worry about the lack of support. So after estimating that it was another two-way quest, Unsworn Sword was very calm. Chapter 368. There were only a few players who had the same mentality as Unsworn Sword. Most of them were on high alert when they saw someone sneaking up on them, especially the mercenary players who had been sacrificed before. There was no longer any suspense as to what the reward of this quest would be. It would be the bounty that Unsworn Sword would give. They were already unhappy that they had to sacrifice a level for that bounty, and it was absolutely intolerable that they had to sacrifice another level. These players, with their own selfish motives, erupted with an incomparable fighting spirit. Boss Unsworn, let's do it. We've been too passive before, and now that we've come to this point, it's time for us to take the initiative. It's better to kill the wrong person than to have any suspense. Who cares what these people's motives are? Let's kill them first. Oathless Sword had never been a kind-hearted person. He would only place his own interests above all else. He was even willing to sacrifice his fellow mercenaries, let alone these random bystanders. Hearing this brother's suggestion, Oathless Sword immediately issued an order in the guild channel. At present, these sneaky players were only moving at a certain distance from them. There were 4 groups of them, each with 5 or 6 people, and they were all professions with excellent speed. Since there was a distance, the best way to attack was naturally the 4 Seas arrow formation. Although they had lost half of their power in Shady Forest City, it was by no means a dispensable existence. These godly archers had always been walking together, ready to attack at any time. Now that Unsworn Sword had issued an order, they did not ask any questions and immediately stopped in their tracks. They spread out in formation, turned around, and knocked their arrows. A wave of arrows flew straight into the sky. The wandering players did not seem to expect the other side to suddenly attack. The godly archers of the 4 Seas were well trained, and it only took them a moment to get into position and shoot the arrows. By the time these people reacted, they were already under the cover of the arrows. A white light suddenly appeared on the ground. Unsworn Sword did not care about the other side's life or death. He only asked the godly archers who had launched the attack, "Any PK points?" No. All the godly archers reported happily after checking their data. This was very clear. Killing people but not increasing PK points was clearly a two-way quest. These people really did not come with good intentions. After gaining a firm foothold in terms of morality, Unsworn Sword became even more spirited. He drew the long sword at his waist and pointed it at a small group of people on the other side. Unsworn Sword shouted proudly. In the eyes of the bystanders, he was extremely lewd. This group of people had already been alerted after the previous group had been killed, and were preparing to flee. However, as mentioned earlier, the crisscrossing 4 Seas archer formation was well trained, and their movements were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they had already adjusted their position. A wave of arrows rained down, and 5 of the 6 people in this group had died. Only one person continued to limp as he ran. A few random archers shot another wave of arrows in unison, and eliminated him. The remaining 2 groups did not hesitate at this time, and had already scattered in all directions. Even the arrow formation of crisscrossing the 4 Seas could not cover such a large area, so they could only choose a target and fire in unison. Most of them were killed by the arrows, and a few managed to escape the shooting range. They looked back at the people from Cloud City in horror. Ha, these guys, I think they are too careless. Unsworn Sword laughed as he spoke to the people around him. He waved his hand to signal them to continue moving forward, and said, "Their opponents are too inexperienced. It won't be like Waterside City, where a small guild picked up this big mission, right?" The players around Unsworn Sword laughed along, but they also felt that Unsworn Sword's thoughts were not too optimistic. No matter which main city, the lower the level of the guild, the more guilds there would be. This was inevitable. If this mission did not have any requirements for the guild's level, then the chances of it being picked up by a small guild would naturally be much higher. At this time, the members of the Child Elite group were also expressing their opinions. "Brother did you manage to appraise the person just now?" Han family young master asked Brother first. As soon as they opened fire just now, Brother also rushed out of the group like an arrow. If he had a camera in his hand, He would really be a typical paparazzi. Most players would be ashamed of their low level and poor equipment, but Brother Yu was not. As the king of intelligence, he was pained by the fact that his appraisal skill was not top-notch. In the child elite group, he was not as good as Sword Demon at one point. For this reason, he had put in a lot of hard work, and he had reached the highest level that he was at, which was not easy. It was already rare for some experts to be able to raise their level and take care of this kind of support skill at the same time. Most people, on the other hand, prioritized their level and could make up for it when their level was higher in the future. This was the most mainstream way of thinking. As for those like Brother Yu who were determined to walk at the forefront of the tide, there were very few of them. At this time, he rushed forward with all his might, wanting to play a role. It was not considered a failure. Now that the appraisal skills level was higher, apart from having a higher accuracy and success rate, the distance that could be carried out had also increased. At that moment, Brother Yu had successfully rushed into his appraisal range. Then, with 2 consecutive claps, he appraised 2 people consecutively. His speed was also extremely fast. Brother Yu proudly thought that this was his ultimate technique of 2 consecutive attacks. However, when he turned around and returned to the group, he saw a figure that behaved similarly to him. Brother Yu recognized that it was Miss Wuxia, who was reborn as Amethyst. It was not easy for Brother Yu to have a fan. Of course, he would not forget that this lady also had such pursuers. When he realized that he was not alone, Brother Yu felt very gratified. As soon as he returned to the group, the Han family young master asked him about it. When Brother Yu flipped through the recording of the consecutive shots just now, he was stunned at first. Level 33, level 32. Isn't this too inexperienced? Brother Yu was surprised. Such a low level. Everyone was even more shocked. At this stage of the game, it would be polite to say that this level was inexperienced. Currently, players generally believed that the game had just begun after level 30. I wonder what Wuxia saw, Brother Yu muttered. Let me ask. Gu Fei also saw Wuxia, which was why she rushed out like Brother Yu. He guessed that this lady also went to search for information. It's the same. It's the same level. Gu Fei did not mention the number. It was just a concept. The few of them looked at each other. They really picked up a treasure in the last stage? Brother Yu said. Then we won't be able to earn anything, right? Unscathed in battle pretended to be depressed. Yutian, did you see anything? The Han family's young master asked Imperial Divine Cry. This guy didn't go to the unhindered 4 Seas arrow formation. When the other mercenary groups launched their attack, the archers only shot 2 arrows at him, but he didn't move at all. He just stared at them with wide eyes. I didn't see anything, Yutian Shenming said. Is that so? The Han family young master asked again. Is there a hidden meaning in your words? Yutian Shenming shivered. You didn't even see their guild badge? Han family young master asked. I don't think so. Yutian Shenming said. I didn't see it either. Brother Yu was much more confident. As expected of someone who searched for information. Even if he didn't notice it, he would save a thought so that he could save it and load the file. Even though he didn't have eagle eyes, he had gotten quite a bit closer. Now that he thought about it, he didn't see any guild badge on them. Should we ask Wuxia to confirm? Gu Fei also knew that this was a big problem. The guild badge in the parallel world was given by the system. It wasn't a requirement for players to wear it. Some guild badges were ugly, so players weren't willing to wear them. For example, crisscross. However, when a large-scale guild war broke out, everyone would consciously wear the badge. This was because there were hundreds of players in a guild in the game. Even the guild leader would have a hard time recognizing everyone. Moreover, PK didn't have the protection of the same party or guild, so they could only rely on the badge to identify each other. Wear the badge in charge. This was the slogan that every guild leader was very familiar with. If it was a long-range battle, then not wearing it would be fine. However, once it was a close combat battle, not wearing it would be asking for trouble. With so few people, they must be here to check out the situation. They don't have any intention of fighting us, right? So wearing the badge doesn't mean anything. Yutian Shenming's analysis was quite relevant. Look, Crisscross didn't wear it. Little Wimp even learned to give examples. Indeed, it doesn't mean anything, but we have to be careful. Han family young master said as he went to look for Unsworn Sword. No badge. With Unsworn Sword's vast experience, he naturally understood what Imperial Divine Hymn was implying. However, he quickly followed Imperial Divine Hymn's train of thought. The melee hasn't started yet, so it's not surprising that they aren't wearing it. Look, no one in our guild is wearing it. That's because your badges are too ugly. That's why all of you are used to it. Unless you have no other choice, you won't wear it. Han family young master pointed out mercilessly. I'm sorry. Unsworn Sword laughed dryly. I also admit that they might not be ready to wear it. However, since we have already discovered it, we should be prepared for another situation. Han family young master said calmly. You are saying that they are a mercenary group? A mercenary group that is fighting against us for a two-way mission? Unsworn Sword laughed. This kind of situation is negligible. There is no need to prepare at all. Han family young master said calmly. Then what else is there? Unsworn Sword was confused. Han family young master didn't say anything. He looked at Black Index Finger, the leader of Black Hand mercenary group. Black Index Finger had been listening to their conversation for a long time. When he saw Han family young master looking at him, he nodded and said, Han brothers, you are thinking of competing for the mercenary mission? Han family young master nodded. Although Unsworn Sword was mainly focused on attacking guilds, and his mercenary business was handled by Shadow Years, it was not to the extent that he had never heard of this quest. From his expression, it was clear that he knew how scary this quest was. If that's the case, it's going to be troublesome. Unsworn Sword changed his tone. It's not too troublesome. Han family young master smiled. At least it's not competing for the guild mission indiscriminately. Chapter 369. Unsworn Sword immediately ordered the team to slow down. Then he gathered a bunch of leaders and told them about this important discovery. Indiscriminate competition for mercenary missions. All of the mercenary leaders muttered to themselves. In fact, most of them had never experienced this kind of mission before. When they mentioned it, they actually felt a bit envious. But we can't be sure. Gu Xiaoshang said. Maybe they're a guild, just not wearing a badge. Xiaoshang, you're thinking the same thing as me again. Unsworn Sword said emotionally. Don't speak nonsense again. Gu Xiaoshang said angrily. The current situation is like this. Han family young master said disapprovingly. We can already confirm that the opponent is part of a two-way mission. If it's a single mercenary group, the threat can be ignored. If it's a guild, then we've already identified 4 people, and they're all around level 32. May I ask which guild would accept players that are just over level 30? Everyone listened and nodded in agreement. Take Unhindered for example. For a guild like theirs that had already reached level 5, their average level had already stepped into the realm of level 40. Guilds that were slightly weaker than them would at most have a few level 37 or 38 players. In their eyes, a level 30 player was basically a beginner noob. Big guilds simply wouldn't accept such a low-level player. What the Han brothers mean is, regardless of whether the opponent is a single mercenary group or a guild, we can be sure that the opponent is not a threat to us. So what we need to worry about is the situation of indiscriminate competition for mercenary missions. Unsworn Sword said. Han family young master nodded. If that's the case, then those few people just now are just stragglers. The real threat hasn't even arrived yet. Unsworn Sword said. If it's an indiscriminate competition for mercenary missions, then we need to understand which of the stronger mercenary groups are here. Guild leader Unsworn. You guys must have done this kind of homework, right? Han family young master said. Of course we have. Unsworn Sword said with a serious expression. Speaking of mercenary groups, there is a very famous one in Sunset City called the 100 Battles Mercenary Group. The leader is one of the 5 roaches, 100 Battles Mercenary Group. In Sunset City, the status of the 100 Battles Mercenary Corps was even higher than that of their strongest guild, Fallen Leaves Roots. This is unimaginable in any main city. He's that strong. Everyone was shocked. One had to know that guilds and mercenary groups were completely different in terms of numbers. For a mercenary group to be able to suppress the strongest guild, didn't that mean that each member of the mercenary group had the strength to fight against multiple guilds? More importantly, everyone believed that the strength of the strongest mercenary corps in each main city should be about the same. The 100 Battles mercenary corps could suppress the strongest mercenary corps in Sunset City, and perhaps even surpass the current unhindered 4 Cs. Unsworn Sword continued to describe his understanding of this mercenary group. From the outside, the biggest feature of this mercenary group is that Grandmasters of Combat make up a large portion of the group. Many Grandmasters of Combat. The people who heard this information were a little stunned. During the open beta period, the Grandmaster of Combat was the weakest class in the parallel world. Although the situation had changed after the official launch, the newcomers had yet to reach the top of the game. Therefore, among the high-level players, the Grandmaster of Combat was the least. This also led to a considerable number of players having very little experience fighting Grandmasters of Combat. Some people had not even piked with a Grandmaster of Combat until now. It can't be a coincidence that they have so many Grandmasters of Combat. Is there something strange about this mercenary group? Luoluo asked. According to rumors, this mercenary group is very good at fighting. Some say they are a gang of gangsters, some say they are a group of martial arts dojos, and some say they are retired soldiers. Unsworn Sword's understanding of this information was exactly the same as Jiannan's. Everyone looked at each other. How should they deal with such an opponent? No one had any idea. Just as they were helpless, the players in front of the team sent a message. Someone is blocking the way. Protect Todd. Unsworn Sword hurriedly shouted, then took the lead and ran to the front of the team. As he ran, he made arrangements. How the arrow formation should advance with silent steps, how the thieves should circle around, how the priests should position themselves, how the mages and warriors should coordinate, and which direction the mercenary group was in charge of. Unsworn Sword gave a series of orders in one breath, but the more he moved forward, the more surprised his companions who received the orders looked at him. Finally, Unsworn Sword came to the front of the team. With a glance at the legendary roadblock, he immediately understood why his brothers were so surprised. 5 people. There were only 5 players blocking the way in the middle of the road, stopping the team of players from above the clouds. Facing 5 people, Unsworn Sword made such a grand arrangement. It was no wonder that his brothers were surprised. Raining the 4 Cs arrow formation was already ready. Seeing that their guild master had also squeezed to the front, they immediately sent a message asking, "Guild Master, do we attack now?" Unsworn Sword glanced at the 5 people. For Grandmasters of Combat and 1 warrior, he had already guessed their origins. In that case, his judgment of competing for mercenary missions without discrimination was not wrong at all. Wait for my order. After Unsworn Sword spoke to the archers of arrow formation, he stepped forward and looked at the 5 people. These 5 people looked calm. Unsworn Sword did not know if it was a psychological effect, but he just felt that these 5 people seemed to be very imposing just by standing there casually. Unsworn Sword finally spoke. "You 5 must be members of Sunset City's 100 Battles mercenary group? I didn't expect guests from outside the city to be able to recognize us at a glance," one of the 5 said without batting an eyelid. "What advice do you have?" This was a question that he already knew the answer to. Mission. This was a simple answer to the other party's words. Just the 5 of you? Unsworn Sword looked around cautiously. He felt that there must be some kind of ambush around them. No matter how strong they were, 5 people could take care of hundreds of them. "We wouldn't dare." The other party replied. "The 5 of us are here to say hello. At the same time, we can also show you our skills so that you can be mentally prepared." "Oh." Unsworn Sword frowned. "How do you want to see?" "It's very simple. You can randomly pick a few people to spar with us brothers." The other party said. "So what if we win? So what if we lose?" Unsworn Sword said. "The main thing is to let you know our strength first. As for winning or losing, it doesn't matter. Because how can you win?" The other party's words were very arrogant. but there was not a trace of arrogance in his tone and demeanor. "Let me try." Fengxing could no longer hold back and jumped out from the team. Unsworn Sword wanted to stop him, but it was too late. Fengxing rushed towards the other party with big steps. Unsworn Sword thought it was fine. He would take this opportunity to see what the other party's legendary fighting skills were all about. Fengxing seemed to be rushing fiercely, but in fact he did not use his full strength. He intended to suddenly accelerate after getting close to the opponent, catching them off guard. The target he wanted to attack was the second person from the left of the five, the one who had been talking the whole time. Seeing Fengxing rushing up, the others thought that the other party had 5 people, and Fengxing would inevitably be at a disadvantage if he went alone. Therefore, without waiting for Unsworn Sword's order, some players who were close to Fengxing jumped out and prepared to help. However, although the other party had 5 people, only one person made a move, and that was the one Fengxing wanted to attack. Before Fengxing reached him, he had already taken the initiative to attack. He also flashed out with big steps, and his speed was no slower than Fengxing's. "Hey!" Seeing that the distance between the two of them was not far, Fengxing abruptly took 2 steps forward, and then launched a galloping horse shooting star. Seeing this, the other party's expression changed slightly. He immediately steadied his feet and twisted his body. After galloping out, although the general direction could not be changed, the direction of his fist could still be controlled. Fengxing hurriedly crossed his arm, trying to hit the other party when he passed by him. However, this move seemed to have been predicted by the other party. Before Fengxing's arm reached him, the other party had already lowered his body and swept his leg. Fengxing's arm didn't hit the person, but his leg was swept by the other party's leg. He staggered and almost fell to the ground. Fengxing's galloping horse shooting star hadn't finished yet, but it was interrupted by the other party's leg sweep. This meant that the other party's attack had higher priority than galloping horse shooting star. This was just a normal attack. This Grandmaster of Combat in front of him actually added strength? Not many people played the Grandmaster of Combat, so there were few arguments about adding points to the class. Most people agreed on adding agility and spirit. For any class, the strength was reflected in the skills. No one would use normal attacks to conquer the world, and the damage output of Grandmasters of Combat skills was not outstanding. Although adding points to strength could increase the damage, the biggest advantage of the Grandmaster of Combat was the short cooldown time of the skills. The general rule of online games was that the more outstanding the characteristics of one's class was, the more powerful it would be. Countless people researched this, and according to the system's introduction, finally came up with the Grandmaster of Combat combo. This method could make up for the lack of damage output, and more importantly, it was very cool, so it was immediately loved by the public. Since then, everyone had focused on spirit, and agility was, of course, an essential element for creating a combo. Therefore, there was no dispute about adding points to these two. However, today Fengxing, who was also a famous Grandmaster of Combat on the ranking list, encountered a non-mainstream method of adding points. Before he could criticize the other party's mistake, he staggered. The other party had already seized the opportunity, bounced up, and kicked Fengxing right in the middle of his back. Fengxing, who was already unstable, immediately flew out like a kite with a broken string. Fengxing. The players who rushed out of the crowd to help didn't expect Fengxing to be kicked away so easily. They hurriedly wielded their weapons and came to his rescue. Chapter 370. However, after the opponent sent Fengxing flying with a kick, he did not immediately chase after him. Instead, he allowed the reinforcements who were further away from Fengxing to rush over and protect him. Fengxing was in a sorry state, but he knew that he was not badly injured. The opponent's sweep and kick were all ordinary attacks. It was only because the opponent had added points into his strength that he looked more impressive than an ordinary Grandmaster of Combat. In fact, he was not seriously injured at all. Under the concerned gazes of the people around him, Fengxing stood up with an ashamed look on his face. On the other side, Unsworn Sword was also shocked. He and Fengxing were old brothers, and they knew each other very well. No one knew better than him how powerful Fengxing was. Seeing a nameless small fry kick Fengxing to the ground with only 2 steps, Jihao realized that the power of this 100 battles mercenary group wasn't just a bluff. Or could it be that the person in front of him was actually a follower, pretending to be a follower to mislead the opponent into thinking that they were strong? Unsworn Sword could not help but think this way. He was too confident in Fengxing's strength, and did not want to believe that he would be easily defeated by a small fry. Thinking of this, Unsworn Sword winked at the people who had jumped out. These people were all old subordinates of Unsworn Sword, and they immediately understood what he meant. They all shouted, "Let's learn from him," and swarmed forward. Their target was not only the one who sent Fengxing flying, but also the 4 people who were standing next to him. Unsworn Sword also stared at the 4 people. He wanted to see if all of them were so strong, or if only one of them was deliberately mystifying. This time, there were more people who attacked. Fengxing stood still, and there were 11 other people who rushed up. They were all melee professions. They were divided into groups and looked for opponents in pairs. Big guilds always bullied others with numbers. They disdained doing undignified things like one-on-one duels. However, although there were many people, the result was still not good. The 5 opponents were all very agile. Even the warrior in the middle could be seen to have added points into his agility. Of the 11 people who rushed up, some were beaten to the ground, some were kicked to the ground, and some were sent flying. This time, however, his opponent didn't just use a normal attack like the previous one. Instead, he used a skill as a decoration. For example, the warrior had used charge, and the player who had been knocked away was the only one who had sustained heavy injuries. He was unable to get up for a long time. Just like Fengxing, the others also realized that although they had been knocked down to the ground, they hadn't been harmed too badly. Therefore, they all had the ability to continue the fight. Just like when Fengxing was knocked down, the enemies didn't chase up to kill Jihao and Fengxing. Instead, they stayed right where they were. Unsworn Sword frowned and signaled the others with his eyes. Thus, other than the heavily injured one who was still lying on the ground, the rest of the people rushed forward. Unsworn Sword wanted to see if their side would gain some experience after being defeated by the other side once and gain some ability to deal with them. The reality was really cruel. Those who rushed up again were beaten into a sorry state after 2 clangs. Just as Unsworn Sword and the others closed their eyes and couldn't bear to watch, they suddenly heard a "eh" sound from their side. This sound contained an extremely pleasant surprise, making Unsworn Sword very, very unhappy. Immediately, he glared at the source of the sound and saw a smiling face. It was actually Gu Fei. This made Unsworn Sword speechless. He didn't dare offend Lord Gu Fei right now. At this time, after a series of I-O sounds, the group of people who had come out to fight fell to the ground for the second time. The other side still didn't chase up to kill them, and instead stood obediently where they were. Unsworn Sword finally understood that when the other side said that he wanted to let them understand the strength, it wasn't just for show, nor was it arrogant. It was the truth. Now, Unsworn Sword had a very good understanding of the other side's strength. Strong, very strong indeed. Even Fengxing, a core member of their side, was easily defeated by them. How many people in their side could be stronger than Fengxing? If this mercenary group really had hundreds of such people, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they could suppress an entire guild. Unsworn Sword's palms were a little sweaty, but it seemed that the other side was still waiting for someone to come out. Unsworn Sword was no longer in the mood to send people out to humiliate himself. He had already decided to kill them. Just as he was about to summon an arrow formation, he didn't expect that Gu Fei had already walked out of the crowd and slowly walked up to the 5 people. Unsworn Sword's eyes lit up again. This was because Gu Fei seemed to be incomparably valiant in terms of skills. He often fought one against many. Look at how dazzling his PK value was. Although he was a mage, everyone now knew that mages didn't walk the normal path. They would always rush in front of you and slash at you with their swords. Let him try. If he can't do it, then I'll directly send 500 people to devour these 5 people. Let's see if one of them can fight 100, Unsworn Sword thought to himself. At this time, Gu Fei had already entered the battlefield. The few people who were knocked down had just climbed back to their feet. They turned around and looked at Unsworn Sword. Seeing their leader slightly shaking his head, they immediately understood his intention and stepped back, leaving a large space for Gu Fei. Only one this time? The 5 people on the other side took a glance at Gu Fei, then shouted towards the main formation. No one responded, which meant that they agreed. After taking a closer look at Gu Fei, the other side frowned and mumbled, "Another mage." It seemed that they weren't interested in fighting against mages. Gu Fei didn't answer and continued walking forward. The other side obviously didn't plan to fight with numbers like Unhindered did. Only one person stood out to fight, and it was the one who kicked Feng Xing. At this time, Gu Fei suddenly put the sword he had been carrying in his hand back into his pocket and went up to fight empty-handed. "What the hell is he doing now?" shouted Yutian Shinming. This group of acquaintances knew that Gu Fei's great damage came from his equipment. Without equipment, Gu Fei's magic damage was a shame to mages. Yutian Shinming's shout was very loud, but Gu Fei turned a deaf ear to it. With 2 steps he approached the other side, then suddenly cupped his hands and bowed to him. This action startled the other side, but before he could think, Gu Fei had already swept his leg over. This person had been in low spirits ever since he saw that Gu Fei was a mage. Seeing that the mage didn't attack and was instead getting closer and closer to him, he began to mutter to himself. Everyone knew that mages were mainly long-range attackers. Only when Gu Fei walked up to him and suddenly bowed to him did this guy come back to his senses. Then he saw this kick flash, and the person hurriedly ducked to avoid it. Just as he was about to take the opportunity to counterattack, he didn't think that this kick would actually fall at the same time he bent down, chopping at his neck. This guy was immediately at a loss. It turned out that the other side's kick wasn't a sweep, but a chop. Didn't this mean that bending down to avoid it was the same as giving his opening to the other side? Just as he was regretting it, he suddenly saw his vision go black. Gu Fei's right leg chopped at him, followed by a small jump with his left leg, and a knee had already hit the bridge of the person's nose. This person couldn't help but lean backwards. Before he landed, Gu Fei twisted his body in the air and turned his back to him, but the right leg that was swung over just happened to kick this person's chest. This person staggered back a few steps. Gu Fei himself was also sent flying, but he landed steadily. Among the 5 people, one of them had already shouted out in surprise, "9 revolutions chain? That was a 9 revolutions chain, right?" Gu Fei smiled and said, "Don't you guys practice the puncturing kick fist?" As soon as these words came out, the 5 people immediately widened their eyes, because what Gu Fei said wasn't wrong at all. The 9 revolutions chain referred to the 9 sets of kicks that could be mutually matched, so it was called the 9 revolutions chain. The chain referred to the 9 sets of kicks, because any one of them was a step and a kick, linked together. Apart from this, the left and right feet alternated, so the full name of this set of kicks should be 9 revolutions chain Mandarin duck kick. These people were familiar with it, so they casually shortened it to 9 revolutions chain. But saying that they practiced the puncturing kick fist wasn't wrong, because this 9 revolutions chain was the oldest set of the puncturing kick fist. After the person who had been kicked back by Gu Fei stabilized his footing, he looked at his health, as if he hadn't been attacked at all. He also understood that Gu Fei was a mage, so his damage was limited. Moreover, he was still wearing equipment, so Gu Fei's empty kick couldn't even break through his defense. But this was the judgment of a player. From the perspective of an expert, he had just been utterly defeated. The first kick wasn't a sweep, but a split kick. These were originally 2 completely different kicking techniques, but he actually misjudged them. Of course, he understood that it wasn't a momentary blur, but the opponent's feint was too fast and too real. He easily fell for it, and even more accurately calculated how he would dodge. In the eyes of an outsider, he was afraid that he had obediently stuffed his head under the opponent's feet. Thinking of this person's face turned red. And with their habits, they would immediately think. If this was a real competition, they would have directly sold their vitals to the opponent. If this split kick came down, even if he didn't directly faint, his eyes would definitely go black for a while. Then a knee to the face, and a leg to the heart. This person thought like this, one hand covering his nose, the other hand covering his chest, as if he couldn't hold on any longer. This person isn't simple. This person said very seriously, But, is he really using the 9 revolutions chain? Why do I feel like it doesn't look like it? Another person muttered. Hey, how can you learn martial arts by rote? You need to have some imagination to adapt to the situation. Gu Fei immediately criticized this person. Is that so? Then let me experience it. This person had already jumped out of the formation and waved his hand, sending a punch towards Gu Fei's face. Gu Fei dodged to the side, and this person followed up with a kick. Gu Fei took half a step back to avoid it. This person's foot landed on the ground, followed by another foot, and Gu Fei took another step back. This person looked even more vigorous and couldn't wait to get ready to kick again. But just as his front foot had just landed on the ground, and his hind leg had already been lifted in the air, suddenly, his front ankle was gently pushed in the direction of the force he was about to launch. This made him immediately lose his balance. Pa! His third foot also kicked out, but it kicked into the sky, and at the same time, he had fallen on his back. Butterfly knot. I wanted to make the best of a mistake, but still, in response to the voice of the masses, Luoya City was renamed to Sunset City. Chapter 371. As the saying goes, the onlookers see the game more clearly than the players. Before the fallen brother could figure out what was going on, all the spectators, including Sword Without Oath and the others, saw it clearly. However, in their eyes, Gu Fei just quickly kicked his opponent to the ground, but in the eyes of the experts, they felt that Gu Fei's timing was extremely precise. It was as if he had already predicted where his opponent would step, and his foot had already kicked there. From the looks of it, it was as if his opponent had taken the initiative to send his foot right in front of his foot. Your jade ring steps are too precise. Gu Fei said calmly to the fallen brother. The brother on the ground immediately understood. He stepped on the jade ring steps and used the Mandarin duck kick, but he only took 3 steps before Gu Fei read his steps. When he continued to step on the 4th step, Gu Fei already knew where his foot would land. Naturally, the more precise his steps were, the more unlucky he was, and he was caught red-handed by Gu Fei. He did not lose much health from this fall, but at this time, the battle between them was no longer a battle of life and death like in the game, but a contest of skills. This person was thinking the same thing as the previous one. If it was in real life and he was swept down and the opponent was right in front of him, with his skills he could easily crush his head with a kick. If he lost, he would also lose. After this person got up from the ground, he stared blankly at Gu Fei, and retreated without saying a word. If they still couldn't tell that Gu Fei was very tall and powerful, then they wouldn't dare to pretend to be experts anymore. There was no doubt that the person in front of them was also a person who practiced martial arts like them. Just by looking at the few professional terms that he casually said, and the confused looks on the faces of the people around him, they knew that the two of them were no longer in the same world. The remaining 3 people who had not appeared looked at each other, and then looked at the 2 people who had already suffered a loss. Like Sword Without Oath, the 5 people nodded slightly, and the 3 people walked out side by side. This time, they were extremely serious. The 3 people who came up together cupped their fists and bowed to Gu Fei. Please advise us. Please advise me. After Gu Fei cupped his fists in return, the 3 of them immediately rushed forward and stood in a triangular formation. They slowly circled around Gu Fei, looking for a good opportunity to strike. Gu Fei was surrounded by 3 people, but he was still calm and composed, with the demeanor of a master. Seeing that, the people in Cloud City who wanted to help finally gave up on this idea. At this point, they could finally understand why Gu Fei was so strong. He was the same kind of person as the 100 Battles mercenary group, and his level was obviously higher. If these people were small gangsters, then he was a big gangster. If these people were from the martial arts school, then he was at least the owner of the martial arts school. If these people were retired soldiers, then Gu Fei was a super excellent soldier who wanted to retire but was not allowed to. Just as everyone was letting their imaginations run wild, the 3 opponents suddenly shouted and charged at Gu Fei, who was in the middle of the encirclement. Some punched, some kicked, and the warrior stabbed out with the great sword in his hand. Gu Fei just smiled. He took 2 steps to the side and twisted his body, The three people suddenly found that there was no target in front of them. The warrior also used the charge skill. At this time, the sword was about to stab his own people, so he quickly cancelled the skill. In addition, fearing that it was too late, he also raised the sword above his head. The tip of the sword flashed in front of his brother's eyes. And the guy was shocked into a cold sweat. Then he heard Gu Fei slowly say behind him, "The one with the sword, you're new, right?" The warrior immediately opened his mouth and didn't know what to say. He was like a child who had made a mistake and was caught. It's already very complicated for three people to cooperate with each other. How can a beginner like him do it with you guys? Gu Fei turned around and lectured the other two. He then turned to the warrior and said, "The two over there have a very solid foundation. They're so solid that they don't know how to be flexible. You, on the other hand, are a complete mess. Do you think that using the charge skill in the game will be very powerful? Do you know that all the flaws were revealed by you? You didn't even realize that you made a mistake when you were circling in the plum blossom steps? Then you made another mistake and another 17 steps. And then you use charge. Do you still want to hit someone?" The warrior was stunned by Gu Fei's words. His head drooped lower and lower until it was almost stuffed into his pants. Gu Fei saw that he knew he was wrong and said to the other two, "His level is completely different from yours. How can he cooperate with the three of you? Why don't you two try the two of you? The two of us haven't practiced the two of us before." The two of them said embarrassedly, "You haven't practiced the two of us, and you're already practicing the three of us?" Gu Fei's eyes widened. The two of them blushed and said, "Actually, it's not really practice. We just look at the boxing manual and find it interesting. Then we walk around in private and occasionally try it in the game. Oh, it's not easy to reach this level. But you still have to practice the two of you first. Otherwise, you won't make any progress with the three of you," Gu Fei earnestly said. "Some things have to be done step by step. If you force yourself to take this step, you'll end up like the brother just now. One mistake in the plum blossom steps, and then it'll be 18 steps." When the soldier saw that Gu Fei was no longer talking about him, he raised his head. He didn't expect that Gu Fei would mention him again in the blink of an eye. He hurriedly lowered his head again, muttering to himself, "Didn't you just say 17 steps?" Unexpectedly, Gu Fei's ears were sharp. He immediately heard it and said angrily, "Including the first wrong step, isn't it exactly 18 steps? You're talking back after doing something wrong. If you weren't a beginner, I would have killed you long ago. Go back and practice your basics before coming out again." The warrior was a yes man and didn't dare to breathe loudly. Gu Fei looked at them one by one. The five of them didn't speak to him. Gu Fei had no choice but to use his gaze to cover all five of them and asked, "What other advice do you have next?" The five of them seemed to wake up from a dream. Only then did they realize what they were here for. They didn't expect to be beaten senseless by Gu Fei in just a few moves. They didn't dare to have any doubts about Gu Fei. Not only was this person extraordinary, but his knowledge far exceeded theirs. He was someone with a great background. The five of them thought about it and quickly replied, "Not for now. Come back later. Come back later." After saying that, the five of them had already turned around and fled. They were no different from the usual players who were beaten badly in PvP. However, the reality was that the five of them were abnormally full. What damage could Gu Fei's barehanded attacks do? Moreover, the last three of them didn't even need to be attacked by Gu Fei. He just flashed out of their circle, and a verbal lecture was enough to defeat them. This kind of defeat was truly convincing. "Hey, where are you going? When are you coming back? Bring more experts." Gu Fei was still shouting at the five of them at the top of his lungs. It wasn't clear whether the five of them heard him or not. In any case, they ran away as fast as they could. When Gu Fei turned around again, the players in Cloud City were closely watching him. They all ran away. Gu Fei awkwardly explained to everyone. "All of you kung fu?" Obviously, everyone was not concerned about whether or not they could run away. They just suddenly realized that if they wanted to become stronger in the game, other than getting equipment to level up and farming skills, there seemed to be another way. Moreover, this method was very powerful. It could create a near-invincible superhuman like Gu Fei. Does this guy really know some bullshit martial arts? The Han family's young master mumbled. In fact, these people who were most familiar with Gu Fei already knew that he was different from the others. Moreover, Gu Fei also bluntly said that he was a kung fu expert. However, in this era, kung fu was so insignificant that it could be ignored. In reality, no one had the chance to experience what kung fu was. Most of their understanding came from various kinds of flashy literature and movies, as well as various kinds of kung fu performances. Those kinds of novels and movies were known to be fake. The nature of those performances was actually not much different from gymnastics. This kind of kung fu with real combat effectiveness was very difficult for ordinary people to see. Now that they had personally experienced such a miracle, who would want to miss it? After a moment of astonishment and silence, suddenly the crowd rushed towards Gu Fei, waving their hands and shouting, "Brother Qianli, teach me, teach me." This was a scene that Gu Fei was very happy to see, but he also knew why these people were suddenly so enthusiastic. If they thought that people who practice kung fu would only learn kung fu without asking for a reason, then they were wrong. Don't forget that kung fu was basically a technique that taught people how to hurt or even kill people. Saying that it was self-defense was just self-comfort. Self-defense was also based on the method of attacking the opponent. Kung fu was full of offensive power from the beginning to the end. Therefore, although Gu Fei usually seemed to be eager for everyone to practice kung fu, in fact, when someone really wanted to ask him for advice, he absolutely had to first understand the other party's intentions and character. Take the savior of cowards, for example. Although he started out as a bad gang in Moonlit Night City, Gu Fei could easily see that this person had a very simple personality, and was definitely not a bad person. Teaching kung fu to such a person was completely reassuring, so he carefully taught him the seven-sided mantis fist. As it turned out, Gu Fei was right. The savior of cowards was originally a person with some foundation, and with Gu Fei's guidance, his strength was not something that ordinary people could deal with. However, this guy was still naive and silly. He never said that he bullied others with his kung fu, and he did not even have the desire to deliberately encounter some injustice to test his kung fu. Even Gu Fei was ashamed of his inferiority. If he had this level of kung fu, he would not have appeared in the parallel world. This large group of people in front of him had all discovered the secret of Gu Fei's strength, and all of them looked sincere, and wanted to ask Gu Fei for advice. But at this time, who knew what they would do after learning this skill? Before figuring this out, Gu Fei would not casually teach them. However, at this time, everyone's enthusiasm was really high. Seeing that it was unlikely that he would even have a chance to explain, Gu Fei could only temporarily avoid it. After a teleportation, he pulled away from the crowd, turned around and ran. Chapter 372. Gu Fei's escape was clean and neat, without the slightest bit of sloppiness. His determination could be seen. After all, this was something that the Kung Fu families had been discussing for a long time. The gradual decline of Kung Fu had something to do with the strict disciple selection. Learning Kung Fu would not be able to shoulder the heavy responsibility of maintaining world peace, nor would it be able to exchange it for any easy benefits in life. In addition, the requirements for the person learning Kung Fu were so high that it was even harder to find a disciple than a master. Even so, Gu Fei and the Gu family had always adhered to this principle and never wavered. They insisted that Kung Fu was used to cultivate Ultraman, and not to create little monsters. Furthermore, even their own family members did not want to learn Kung Fu, let alone outsiders. Gu Fei thought about these things as he ran, and couldn't help but feel a wave of sadness. When the players on the cloud saw Gu Fei run so quickly, many of them stopped in their tracks. The message that Gu Fei ran was very obvious. Naturally, he was not willing to teach Kung Fu. Even if they caught up, it would be meaningless. Many of them looked unhappy. They felt that Gu Fei was playing the game too dishonorably. He had been high for so long, and it was time for him to contribute his method for everyone to be high together. However, since Gu Fei was not willing, there was nothing they could do. They could only be angry in their hearts. More importantly, even if they chased, most of them were not as fast as Gu Fei. However, among these people, There was one person whose speed was clearly faster than Gu Fei, so she did not give up and continued to chase. This person's speed was very fast, so fast that Gu Fei did not need to look back. When he heard the hurried footsteps behind him, he already knew who it was. Gu Fei only knew one person who could catch up to him so easily. Slender Waist Dance. Gu Fei looked and sure enough, it was Slender Waist Dance's fiery red figure. Gu Fei didn't know how many times he had seen this figure charge into the crowd in such an aggressive manner, and then set off a burst of white light. He didn't expect that it was coming for him today. But if it was this girl who wanted to learn? Gu Fei thought about it and felt that Slim Waist Dance was a good person. But she had killed quite a few people in a second, so she was a bit arrogant. Teach her kung fu? Gu Fei couldn't make up his mind. To be honest, Gu Fei did not have much experience in choosing a disciple. According to the rules, opening a dojo and accepting disciples required the approval of one's own master. Although Gu Fei's master was his father, he hadn't given him this right yet. It was fine to give him a few pointers like teaching a coward's savior, but Gu Fei had not yet obtained the qualification to be a hands-on teacher and disciple. While he was thinking about this, Slim Waist Dancer had already rushed in front of Gu Fei. Without waiting for Gu Fei to speak, she had already reprimanded him. "Hey, I didn't know that you were so stingy." Gu Fei was startled, and immediately realized what she was talking about. He could only smile bitterly. "You don't understand." "What don't I understand?" "Hey, don't be like this. If you have something fun to play with, take it out and play with everyone. You're actually scared to the point of running away. That's too ugly. This isn't your style," Slim Waist Dancer said. "Then what is my style?" Gu Fei couldn't help but ask. This," Slim Waist Dancer stammered. After thinking for a long time, she realized that she actually didn't know Gu Fei that well. Finally, she said angrily, "Even if you don't want to, don't run. Go back and kill them." Gu Fei was speechless. Slim Waist Dancer was very proud. "How about it? Speechless now? I told you, how could you be like this?" "Sigh, you wouldn't understand even if I said it." As Gu Fei spoke, he glanced in that direction to see if there was anyone else like Slender Waist Dance who was chasing after them. No, not a single one. Although Gu Fei had been caught by Slim Waist Dancer and stopped, the other players in Cloud City were still standing there. No one came over. At most, they would look in their direction a few times. Gu Fei didn't have clairvoyant ears. He didn't know that although they didn't come over, the topic of their conversation never left his side. Slim Waist Dancer has caught up to that kid," someone exclaimed. Slim Waist Dancer's speed is unparalleled in the game. Looks like even Drunk Qianli can't do it. Drunk Qianli has also stopped. The two of them seem to be talking. What are they talking about? After someone asked this question, countless people immediately thought of the answer. Everyone was chasing after Gu Fei with the same goal, and Slim Waist Dancer was no exception. Anything that Slim Waist Dancer wanted, unless it wasn't in the game, wouldn't be a problem for her. This was because she had a bottomless money bag. Thinking of this, countless people began to feel regret. They regretted not knowing how to appreciate favors from the start. They actually wanted Gu Fei to teach them. They should have called out the price right from the start. Now that Slim Waist Dancer had made the first move, how could normal people afford the item after she called out the price? Normal people always had the misconception that rich people were all scumbags. If they could buy something with 500 renminbi, they would use 1,000 renminbi to show that they were rich. Of course, that wasn't the case. However, the truth was that Slim Waist Dancer wasn't even talking to Gu Fei about the deal. After Gu Fei explained the issue of kung fu teaching, Slim Waist Dancer was confused and said in the end, "It's so troublesome." Of course. Nowadays there are fewer and fewer people learning kung fu. "I can't help but say that there are too many restrictions," Gu Fei said. "Then cripple it," Slim Waist Dancer said. "That's even worse. The more meaningful something is, the more rules are needed to restrict it," Gu Fei said. "Don't brag like that." Slim Waist Dancer wasn't happy. After Gu Fei laughed, Slim Waist Dancer seemed to have thought of something and suddenly asked, "Do you think I have what it takes?" Gu Fei was startled. From Slim Waist Dancer's words and actions, Gu Fei knew that this girl didn't have such intentions. After all, her ability was enough to trample on most players. Even Gu Fei felt that this girl's speed and reaction were a bit difficult to deal with. Even if she were to ask this question now, Gu Fei knew that she was probably just asking for fun. She didn't really have that intention. This? Gu Fei was vague. What do you mean? Slim Waist Dancer asked with an aggressive gaze. You can do it, you can do it. Gu Fei said vaguely. He had to say this because when he was talking to Slim Waist Dancer about taking in a disciple, he mentioned that moral conduct was the most important thing. As for other things like aptitude, talent, or physical fitness, he wouldn't force them. So if Gu Fei said that Slim Waist Dancer wasn't qualified, it would be the same as saying that there was something wrong with her moral conduct. Looking at Slim Waist Dancer's expression, if Gu Fei really said that, she would definitely fight him to the death. As expected, after receiving this answer, Slim Waist Dancer nodded and said as if she was praising Gu Fei. If that's the case, then I'll allow you to teach me a thing or two. Sorry, I don't have the qualifications to teach disciples, Gu Fei said with a smile. Sure enough, Slender Waist Dance continued to climb upward. However, Gu Fei had already prepared a follow-up move and easily blocked Slender Waist Dance. In your dreams, Slim Waist Dancer said. Who said I wanted you to be my teacher? I just wanted you to pick some simple things to teach me for fun. If that's the case, then let me think about it. When I find something suitable for you, I'll teach you, Gu Fei said. That's more like it. Slim Waist Dancer was finally satisfied. Okay, then you can go back first, Gu Fei said. What about you? Slim Waist Dancer asked. I'll wait for them to calm down a bit. Or maybe I'll just follow them from afar and help if anything happens, Gu Fei said. I'll help you explain when I get back, Slim Waist Dancer said. Okay, that's not bad. After the two finished talking, Slim Waist Dancer turned around and walked towards the players in the clouds, causing another commotion among the players. Slim Waist Dancer is back. When they got closer, some of the archers could clearly see. Slim Waist Dancer's face was filled with happiness. Did she succeed? That was what everyone was thinking. They watched helplessly as the slim-waisted dance got closer and closer. Some of them could no longer hold it in. They were already planning the lines of questioning in their minds, and they were already on the verge of speaking. Even unhindered 4C's guild leader, Sworn Sword, was no exception. He licked his chapped lips, thinking that no matter how high Slim Waist Dancer's price was, he would definitely be able to afford it. After he learned it, he could share it with his brothers in the guild. How great would that be? With his wishful thinking, Unsworn Sword was just about to ask Slim Waist Dance when his vision suddenly blurred. When he looked up, he saw that the Han family's young master had already appeared before him. Guild leader Unsworn, do we do this quest or not? Han family young master said coldly. A quest? Unsworn Sword suddenly remembered. The 5 people blocking their way had all left, but they had foolishly stayed here for so long. They should have sent Todd to the dungeon as soon as possible. The faster they moved, the less trouble there would be. With this thought in mind, Unsworn Sword quickly called out. Why are you all standing here? Let's hurry up. The team began to move forward, and Slim Waist Dancer had already disappeared into the crowd, returning to the circle of reborn amethyst girls. Immediately, a player sneakily came over and bowed. Miss Slim Waist. What? Slim Waist Dancer glared. How about a drunken talk with Qianli? The player asked. The others were listening attentively. What talk? The one about Qianli's drunken kung fu. How much is he willing to teach you? The player asked. Money. Slim Waist Dancer said angrily. Is kung fu something that can be bought with money? Let me tell you. If you want to learn kung fu, think about your own character first. Don't even think about people with bad behavior. In this craft, the most important thing was a person's moral character. Money, 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 my ass. Just based on your way of thinking, I don't think you are qualified. Chapter 373. Slender-Waist Dance put her hands on her hips and glared at the player who had come over to inquire. After this person left, someone else came up to ask more questions. Slender-Waist Dance judged them to be of bad conduct and deprived them of the right to learn Kung Fu for life. In her eyes, anyone who wanted to learn Kung Fu had to be of bad conduct. It was as if she was the only one who could pass the test. In a short while, no one dared to ask Slender-Waist Dance for information, and the news had spread to the ears of every player in the Cloud Players. The players who had been scolded by Slender-Waist Dance weren't in a good mood. Someone came over to ask and immediately scolded. Learn Kung Fu? You want to learn Kung Fu with this kind of conduct? Did you pass the moral education in elementary school? In the end, everyone was confused. Speaking of character, it was a very vague concept. How was it measured? If you had to follow the laws and regulations, then everyone would obey the law. It was just that, occasionally spitting on the street, sitting in a car and seeing an old lady pretending to be asleep, seeing a beautiful woman, and letting her imagination run wild. Were the above behaviors considered bad conduct? Everyone thought hard and examined their own lives. Everyone found that there was a stain on their morals along the way. They couldn't help but feel very depressed. It's over, I'm not qualified to learn Kung Fu anymore, they thought. The players in the cloud slowly moved forward with a strong sense of self-reflection. Gu Fei kept a certain distance from the rest of the group, and walked alone on the other side, just as he had said to Slender-Waist Dance. The scenery of Sunset City was completely different from the other main cities. When the boat had first left the dock, it had probably been a small oasis with flowers, grass, and trees. Gradually, the flowers had withered, the grass had turned yellow, and the trees had withered. Large pieces of grayish-yellow rock began to frequently appear on the ground. This distinct local characteristic made the players along the way understand that they had completely entered the territory of Sunset City. The desert here didn't look like a desert, and the Gobi didn't look like the Gobi either. It was strange and neither fish nor fowl. However, there was one advantage. The view here was very wide. As far as the eye could see, they could already see the huge city in the distance. Not far from them, there was a dried-up river meandering towards Sunset City. Fuck! Someone commented. That island was still surrounded by water, but in the blink of an eye, it has become a dry land. The system is too good. Everyone, stay alert at all times. We'll talk about other things after we're done with the quest. Unsworn Sword reminded everyone. He was worried that everyone would forget about their mission. Everyone nodded. Even the mercenary players didn't care about the bounty. They wanted to protect their own lives, so everyone was united. Take a good look at the surroundings. Unsworn Sword immediately called for a few sharpshooters to scout the area with eagle eyes. The sharpshooters scanned the area with bright eyes, but the results of their reconnaissance were rather disappointing. The main problem was that the players in the clouds didn't know who was here. Currently, in broad daylight, countless players were scattered in every corner of the map, leveling up. Who knew which of these players were really leveling up, and which were pretending to be prey like them? In the end, after these marksmen looked around, they could only report to Unsworn Sword that their movements were unclear. Unsworn Sword frowned as he looked at the spots on the map in front of him. In his eyes, these people could all be enemies. If they rushed forward, the other side could pretend to ignore them. Once they got close to the core area, everyone would unite and attack. What would they do then? As a result, even though it looked like a very ordinary scene of a player leveling up, Unsworn Sword didn't dare lead his party into it. Let's kill them as we go. It doesn't matter what they do, just kill them all and carve out a path. Then we won't have to worry about the background of the people around us. Someone suggested to sort of no oath. Do you want all the players in Sunset City to stop us from completing the quest? Unsworn Sword said angrily. It was fine to kill a few people occasionally, but if they cleared the leveling area like this, they would definitely incur the wrath of the other side. When the time came, the entire main city would start competing for the quest, and they would be crushed like ants. Unsworn Sword's hesitation caused the party to naturally stop advancing. Unsworn Sword sighed and waved his hand. Let's rest here for a bit. All party leaders, come over for a meeting. Fuck, why is there a meeting again? A mercenary party leader cried out. There weren't many battles in this quest, but there were quite a few meetings. It was annoying to the point of death. Gu Fei, who was a few hundred meters away from the main party, saw the party suddenly stop advancing. He didn't ask what was going on. It just so happened that there was a place next to him to farm monsters, so he was much more at ease alone. He randomly picked up monsters and killed them while waiting for the other party to move again. This Cloud City Expedition team's nth leader representative meeting was in full swing. At the same time, at the back of their party, on a large rock that looked like a small mountain, there were already 7 people lying in wait. Why aren't they moving? One of them whispered. There's no need to be so quiet, right? They can't possibly hear us from so far away, right? Another person said. It's better to say it in the chat than whisper, another person said. All right, stop talking nonsense. Azureblade finally spoke. Although they had set out later than the players from Cloud City, their self-made boats were very mobile. Moreover, they could control their own speed. If they worked hard, they would naturally be able to move faster. However, they didn't choose to land at the dock. After forcing their way ashore at another water stall, the group of 7 hurriedly rushed forward and finally caught up to the main party of Cloud City players. At this time, they were lying in wait behind the rock with the intention of scouting. However, they didn't care about the unhindered quest at all. They only had one goal, Gu Fei. To be more accurate, Gu Fei wasn't their goal. Their goal was Gu Fei's equipment. In this situation, we don't have a chance to attack. Looks like we're in too much of a hurry, one person muttered. Azureblade acted as if he didn't hear him. He turned to the person beside him and said, Glue, try to see what they're doing. The player called Glue was the archer in their group of 7. Azureblade had assigned him to look, so it was obvious that he was also a sharpshooter with Hawkeye. There were hundreds of players in Cloud City. Apart from the party leader and a few people from Unhindered, who were urgently discussing a problem, the others had nothing to do. After staring for a while, the person shook his head and said, I don't know what they're doing. They're probably taking a break? Take a break? It wasn't like a large-scale conflict had just broken out. Why would they stop here to rest for no reason? Azureblade's thoughts turned quickly. He guessed that Unhindered's party had probably encountered a problem and was in a dilemma. That was why they stopped here for a discussion. What kind of problem could it be? Wandering Azure Sword thought as he looked around. All he saw were players scattered around the map, fighting monsters. As Azureblade looked around, he immediately came to a realization. The biggest problem for the players in Cloud City was that they couldn't distinguish between friend and foe. The enemy hadn't shown up yet, so they didn't know who to attack. There were so many players in front of them. Maybe they were all enemies, or maybe they weren't. Because of this thought, they couldn't take another step forward. This problem is a bit difficult. Azureblade couldn't help but think for them. What do we do? What do we do? At this time, in the nth meeting of the party leader representatives of the Cloud City expedition, the leaders were also muttering these 3 words. Hey. At this time, Luoluo sent a message to Han Family Young Master. Do you have an idea? If you do, say it quickly. Since the beginning of the meeting, some people had already proposed a few ideas, but they were all rejected because they weren't very reliable. During this process, Han Family Young Master didn't say a word. Luoluo, who had seen Han Family Young Master's craftiness, didn't believe that he didn't have any ideas. Unsworn Sword also looked at Han Family Young Master with anticipation. He was the only one who hadn't spoken yet. It was as if he was Unsworn Sword's last hope. Ahem. Han Family Young Master coughed lightly. Unsworn Sword was immediately overjoyed. Brother Han, what idea do you have? Hehe. I feel that given the current situation, the best thing for us to do is to go our separate ways. The Han Family Young Master said. Split up. Unsworn Sword repeated. He was already thinking about the pros and cons of this idea. The others were also thinking the same thing. Since we don't know where the opponent is or who the opponent is, we should split up. We might be able to lure the opponent out and act according to the situation. Han Family Young Master said. Facing a competitive mission, We are already at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. Wouldn't it be too dangerous if we split up? Someone said. Hee, the other party might have a lot of people on this mission, but how could they work together as a team? Everyone here is a mercenary group leader. Do you need me to explain this? Everyone was silent. Indeed, in this kind of mission, they needed to seek cooperation. However, this cooperation actually required a lot of knowledge. First, they had to look at the difficulty of the mission. After cooperating, they had to be able to complete the mission perfectly. But it wasn't that the more partners they had, the better. The more partners they had, the more people would split the benefits, and the less they would get. Therefore, the number of partners needed to be just right. This required them to accurately grasp the difficulty of the mission and their own strength. Apart from that, because it was a competitive mission, when recruiting groups, it was usually a few strong mercenary groups that formed temporary teams. In this way, other small mercenary groups might not even be able to complete the mission, let alone compete with each other. In the end, they could only withdraw. Therefore, how to form a temporary team that could intimidate others was another field of study. Even if it's not all of them, the temporary team that they formed shouldn't be weaker than us, right? If we split up, wouldn't we be in trouble? Chapter 374. The mercenary group leaders discussed among themselves, expressing their disagreement with the Han family young master's strategy of splitting up the troops. Especially the Black Hand mercenary group's leader, Black Index Finger, who had lost a level in Shady Forest City, was already in a bad mood, and had always been unhappy with the child elite group. Seeing the Han family young master acting like a con man, he was the loudest. The Han family young master listened quietly and did not react at all. Until everyone racked their brains and could not think of anything to criticize, they finally quietened down and began to stare at the Han family young master, waiting for him to explain. The Han family young master then nodded and said calmly, "How to split up? How many teams? Let's discuss it now." There was an uproar. Everyone had said so much, but in the eyes of the other party, they were not even worth a fart. For a moment, the crowd was enraged, and Black Index Finger already had the urge to rush up and beat him up. Everyone, don't be impulsive. Don't be impulsive. Sword of No Oath quickly came out to smooth things over. He was very afraid that there would be disunity within the group, and he was the direct victim. Everyone's emotions calmed down a little, and Sword of No Oath quickly said to the Han family young master, "Brother Han, please explain in detail." The Han family young master glanced at everyone and said calmly, "If we split up, won't they also have to split up? Their target is definitely Todd, but will they know which team Todd is in?" "We have to think about that," Black Index Finger sneered. "But how many teams do we split into, and how many teams do they split into? May I ask what's the point of splitting up? May I ask why you have to tell your opponents how many teams we split into?" The Han family young master asked. Black Index Finger was stunned for a while and said, "Can't they see for themselves? Find a place where we won't be seen, split into teams, and go our separate ways. Then hide one team there, and when the enemy's attention is diverted, secretly bring Todd into the city," Luoluo suddenly said. The Han family young master had the same plan, so he nodded lightly. "Where can I find such a place?" The Black Index Finger continued to scoff. However, everyone's expressions had already changed. Everyone's gazes had also become more accurate. Everyone simultaneously looked towards the dried-up river valley. "It seems there aren't that many fools after all," the Han family young master sighed. The Black Index Finger was furious. In fact, he should have realized it a long time ago. However, he was blinded by hatred and wanted to go against the Han family young master's idea. He accidentally got himself involved, and became the most stupid mercenary leader among all the mercenary group leaders. There is a certain amount of risk in this method, and it is very likely that there will be a certain amount of sacrifice. However, it is still better than this situation where we cannot advance or retreat. After the Han family young master finished his last sentence, he looked at Sword of No Oath. After all, he was the boss, and they were just temporary workers that he had hired. "Let's do it." Unsworn Sword made up his mind very quickly. Turn around and head towards the river valley. Unsworn Sword ordered in the guild channel. The mercenary group leaders also called out to their members. Although the players didn't know what it meant, they still obeyed and headed towards the river valley. The black index finger didn't give up and muttered to himself, "Will no one see us when we reach the river valley? I don't think so. There are some highlands around here. Will no one notice our actions?" When they reached the edge of the river valley, the black index finger was finally speechless. How was this a river valley? It was more like a canyon. The two sides of the river were actually so steep. This was another scene created by the system. How do we go down? Some people felt a little dizzy standing at the side. Just jump. We won't die from the fall. The Han family young master said. There were bound to be a few people who had high jump experience. This height was indeed within their knowledge of safety. They immediately jumped out of the group. Some of the other players who were still hesitant were asking about the damage received by the players who had jumped off the wall. They asked a few people, but the numbers weren't the same. They didn't know what the damage was related to the character's stats, but the threat wasn't that great. As a result, more and more people jumped down. Seeing that they were already halfway down, the black index finger, who had been feeling unhappy, suddenly realized a problem. Wait! He stopped the people who were about to jump down. At this moment, Unsworn Sword was still nearby and hadn't jumped down. The black index finger said to him, "It's easy to go down from here, but how do we get up?" "We can get up not far ahead." The Han family young master pointed and then said, "Bro, can you ask a more in-depth question? Where is it? How come I don't see it?" The black index finger looked in the direction that the Han family young master was pointing. He didn't see any exit and continued to be suspicious. "You can walk over and take a look. It's not far." The Han family young master didn't pay attention to him anymore and jumped down. The surrounding players heard their conversation and clearly didn't care about the black index finger's question. One by one, they walked past him and jumped down, treating him like air. In the blink of an eye, everyone had gathered in the valley. It was quite crowded. On the way here, Unsworn Sword had already listened to the Han family's young master's suggestion and arranged the groups properly. At this time, he had already informed the relevant personnel. After everyone jumped into the valley, they stood in groups according to the established guidelines. After walking along the valley for a short while, they saw the exit that the Han family young master had mentioned. Everyone take care. See you in Sunset City. The two sides of the valley weren't very steep, so climbing up wasn't too difficult. Once everyone climbed up, they would have to advance in different directions. They would definitely encounter each other and fight. Casualties were inevitable. However, as long as Todd arrives successfully, the system will naturally announce that they have failed the mission, and the other party will stop the meaningless battle. Therefore, all we have to do is try our best to stall for time and stall for time. Unsworn Sword gave everyone a final reminder based on what young Master Han had said. Take care, see you later. As each group had to maintain a certain level of combat power and class balance, many friends weren't in the same group. At this time, after the leader finished speaking, the friends also began to say goodbye to each other. "Hey, give it back to me." At this time, even the Han family young master had someone come up to talk to him. However, the content of the conversation had nothing to do with what everyone else was talking about. "How much?" "I'll buy it," the Han family young master said to the person who came. "Not selling, I still want to play." The person who came to talk to the Han family young master was Boundless Mang. "Then use it for a while more, I'll return it to you after the mission is over." At this time, with Unsworn Sword's order, everyone had already started climbing out of the valley. The Han family young master didn't care whether Boundless Mang agreed or not. He waved his hand and called his brothers. "We're going too." The Boundless Mang didn't chase after her, and the group she was in had already set off. After the Han family young master walked out, he took out the binoculars from his pocket and looked around. "This is really good stuff. This thing. I really don't know how that girl got it." The King of Intelligence, Brother Yu, had once again encountered a problem he couldn't understand. It was as if 100 claws were scratching his heart. "Can't you just ask her?" Yu Tian Shenming mumbled. I don't think she will say it. Brother, you had investigated a lot of information and knew the fickleness of human nature. For some very secretive things, asking someone directly would only add to his troubles. In his eyes, this binoculars was really a mysterious thing. It was equivalent to the super-enhanced version of the eagle eye skill. Looking at Yu Tianxinming's sour expression, one could tell the value of this treasure. How could she easily tell the origin of this thing? Brother, you concluded with his rich experience. She might not say it if you ask her, but you can ask Qianli. Unscathed in battle smiled lewdly. Isn't he very close to this girl? Why didn't Qianli come? Sword Demon asked simply. Who knows where he ran off to? The young master of the Han family simply replied. It's so good that Qianli is here. Now that I'm with such a useless person, I'm in a terrible mood. Yu Tianxinming said while glancing to the side with extreme contempt. Drifting revealed an honest smile, as if she didn't hear Yu Tianxinming's blatant attack. Drifting said sincerely, it's really a pity that Qianli isn't here. This team needs his mature and steady temperament. Kid, what did you say? Are you looking for trouble? Yu Tianxinming was also in a lot of pain after his true identity was exposed in the parallel world. He hated words like children very much. Drifting was obviously referring to something. Did I say anything? Unfortunately, this guy didn't know how to quarrel with Yu Tianxinming. After teasing him for a few sentences, he would pretend that he didn't know anything. Stop quarreling. We have a heavy burden on our shoulders. At this time, Han family young master was done playing with the binoculars. After putting them away, he began to become serious. With such a burden, I think our future is uncertain, Yu Tianxinming hinted. Drifting just smiled calmly and didn't say anything else. They went down the river, and now they're splitting up again. Jiannan's team, who had been watching the people in Cloud City, felt a headache when they saw where they were going. There were only 7 of them in total, so they couldn't split up with Cloud Dweller's team. As a result, how could they know which part Gufei was in? That's a good idea. Jiannan suddenly laughed. What's wrong? His partner asked him. The things on the map are just a cover. I'm sure the target they're escorting is still in the river. They left a team here to send the target to Cloud City. As long as they complete their mission, the battle will be over, right? Jiannan said. Oh, that's a good idea, his partner said. Since this is a core team, it must be made up of top players. The magician who recorded the video must be in this team. Jiannan's team of 7 deduced. That's right. So let's go down the river too. Jiannan waved his hand. The 7 of them jumped out from behind the rock and rushed into the river. Chapter 375. After climbing out of the river, the Cloud players went in their designated directions. At this time, Reigning the Four Seas and the various mercenary groups had a total of about 700 people, which was less than half of what they had when they set out from Cloud City. They were now divided into 4 teams of nearly 200 people, and once they exited the river valley, they went in 4 different directions. Of course, they didn't go in 4 different directions like north, south, east, and west. It was just that there was a clear boundary between each team, so it was impossible to surround them all at once. The opponents had to split into 4 groups to stop them. Following unsworn swords orders, everyone looked around vigilantly after climbing out of the river valley. This was especially so for the sharpshooters, who had been observing the situation on the map before this. They finally discovered a variable. In the short period of time that they descended into the river valley, many of the players that were originally scattered all over the map suddenly evolved into creatures that gathered in groups. Moreover, their goal was very clear as they charged towards the river valley. But not long after, the Cloud City players had already climbed out of the river valley and split into 4 groups. The opposing team suddenly looked like they were at a loss. The Cloud City players completely ignored them and went their own ways according to the established guidelines. Moreover, in a situation where the enemy's movements were basically clear, they naturally had to avoid them as much as possible. The longer they dragged, the better. Todd's safety was above everything else. As long as Todd reached the dungeon safely, everything would be over. The guidelines for this battle couldn't be any clearer. After all, the Mercenary Alliance was a team that had been put together temporarily. It was a joke to say that they had tacit understanding. When faced with a situation where they needed to rearrange their plans, even the most decisive of decisions would take some time. Seeing that the 4 teams of Cloud City had already spread out, they still didn't make their move. Seeing this, Kenan shook his head. Look at them. Don't tell me they don't even have a single leader? However, as soon as he finished his sentence, the other players finally moved. Just as Han Family Young Master had predicted, they could only helplessly split into 4 groups and intercept the 4 teams of Cloud City players. It was a chaotic situation, and it was hard to tell who had the upper hand. At least they didn't react too slowly. Kenan let out a long sigh. Why do you look so concerned? The priest asked him. The number of players coming out of Cloud City doesn't seem to have decreased, which means that the number of players left in the river is quite small. The fewer they are, the more elite they are. Do you know who the elites are in this group of people? Jiannan said. Who else could it be other than that video mage? Someone asked. Smoker Drunkard, Yutian Shunming, Unscathed in Battle. Brother Yu. Jiannan paused after each name, his expression solemn. His companions' jaws dropped when they heard these names. It can't be. One person shouted. These individual masters are all in Cloud City. That's right. Moreover, when I came to Water City, I met them. Jiannanyu said. Oh, the group of people you said your friend brought you to meet? And Brother Yu is my friend. Jiannanyu said. These people's names are indeed famous in the online gaming world, but this is a brand new game mode. In the end, we still have to see the real deal. They are so arrogant. Why don't they have the names of the 5 roaches of the parallel world? So, we might not necessarily be their match. The thief in Jiannanyu's group of 7 was actually a tall and sturdy man. At this moment he spoke with a heroic expression. Jiannanyu smiled and said, It is indeed hard to say who is strong and who is weak. However, we only have one goal, and that is to avoid conflict with these experts. The lowest price for the greatest return. This is business. Then what do you plan to do? The thief asked. I hope that Sunset City also has experts who can see through their plans. After that, let Sunset City's people first clash with them, and we will keep an eye on them from afar. Even if they can take care of all the experts in Sunset City, they will definitely consume a lot of energy. We will take advantage of this time to make our move. Jiannanyu's words ended here. Sure enough, it is your usual style. The other 6 companions had obviously worked with Jiannanyu for a long time. After hearing his plan, they could only sigh in admiration. Although the 7 of them had been chatting, their feet had not stopped. However, they did not jump into the river valley. Instead, they had been walking on the riverbank, looking at the situation on the map, and paying attention to whether they had already approached the people in the river valley. On the map, both sides were divided into 4 teams and 8 groups of people. After playing hide and seek for a while, 2 teams were about to make contact. This contact was necessary. Don't forget that Cloud's mission was to escort Todd into the city. If they kept dodging outside the city, it would be too obvious that they were trying to stall for time. Therefore, after their attempt to circle around the city failed, they would have to charge into the city. The first wave of contact with the enemy was the team led by Gu Xiaoshang. Gu Xiaoshang was not only the leader of a mercenary group, but also the guild leader of a guild. He was also the target of Unsworn Sword, so it was not difficult to understand why he was entrusted with such an important task. This girl was also very familiar with commanding teams. She did not panic at all in front of the enemy, and continued to give out orders. Cloud Peak's group was originally a mixed army, but they had been drifting in the outer city for the past few days. They traveled together, experienced battles together, and when they had nothing to do, they would drink a little wine under the moonlight to communicate. Compared to the other mixed armies, they were still a little more standardized. In particular, they had become used to listening to orders. Regardless of whether or not they agreed with Gu Xiaoshang's orders, they would at least follow them. Just this point alone was better than the mixed army in front of them. The people in front of him were no less than the people on Cloud's side. Their team was also orderly, but this reason could be seen at a glance. Why were they organized? Because they were not familiar with each other. Everyone stood at a distance. Now that a group battle was about to break out, they did not even have a commander. They were completely free to act. The moment the two sides clashed, the difference in strength was obvious. The Sunset Sun players were completely defeated, and 2 rows of people fell. Only then did the other side feel that the other side was not a pushover. Therefore, someone volunteered to jump out and take command. It had to be said that players generally worked together with mercenary guilds. Very few played only one of them, so the people in the mercenary group also had the experience of fighting in a large group like a guild. Now that there was a unified command, it was not as ugly as it was at the beginning. After all, to be able to form an alliance to do such a big mission, they were all high-end players in Sunset City. They were not necessarily worse than Cloud City. For a time, the two sides were evenly matched. On the other hand, Cloud City's side seemed to be charging fiercely, but deep down they prioritized survival. Seeing that the other side had stabilized and stood firm, they immediately went on the defensive. The Sunset City players suddenly felt that they were still the best. Once they showed their might, the other side seemed to immediately have no strength to fight back. Their fighting spirit was high, and the sound of killing could be heard incessantly. There were also shouts like, "Hand over the gun and we will not kill you." Of course, the content was "Hand over Todd and we will spare your lives." The purpose of Cloud City's side was to hide Todd's location, so they could not let the other side know that Todd was not in the formation. The best way was of course to make the other side uncertain, so after the other side shouted this, Gu Xiaoshang immediately replied, "Ask the sword in my hand if it agrees." After shouting, he waved his arm and flung the cloak on his back. The cloak that flew out covered one person on the spot, and Gu Xiaoshang took the opportunity to kill him with 2 slashes. Wah wah wah. This woman is so despicable. The opponent roared, and the battle between the two sides became white-hot. Different personalities of the leaders determined the temperament of the entire team in battle. This was very true. Gu Xiaoshang's team fought as soon as they met, just like the girl's character. On the other side, the team led by the Black Index Finger was indecisive after meeting the enemy. "Please, brothers. What can I do for you?" The Black Index Finger smiled and greeted the enemy who rushed over. As the saying goes, one does not slap a smiling face. Seeing the Black Index Finger's action, the other party did not have the nerve to slash at it with his saber. He quickly stopped in his tracks and greeted it, as if it was a normal two-way quest. "Excuse me, this is a two-way quest." "Oh, what is the mission about?" "To assassinate Todd." The other side was quite honest. "Todd is not in our team." The Black Index Finger was even more honest than the other side. The other side heard the truth, but only smiled slightly. "Is that so? Can you let us see?" "Haha, he really isn't here." "Brother, you don't believe me." The Black Index Finger laughed. What was fake was real, and what was real was fake. The Black Index Finger in the art of war was quite ingenious. Making the other side deeply suspect that Todd was in their team was the mission that the Sword of Unsworn had given them. Then they dilly-dallied and chatted with the other side for a while. This was the method that the Black Index Finger used to stall for time. This guy was quite crafty after all. The other two teams naturally had their own ways to complete their own responsibilities and missions. Meanwhile, in the river, the Han family young master and his team finally met their opponents. The other side's murderous intent was obvious. When Brother Yu and the others saw that the Han family young master's plan was seen through, they were naturally shocked. However, there were not many opponents blocking their way, which was a pleasant surprise. "There are not many people. We can deal with them." Yu Tianxunming did not bother to hide his words and completely ignored the other side. "That's for sure." The Han family young master actually continued Yu Tianxunming's words. "It's rare for such an opportunity to appear. If it were me, I would definitely not tell my allies after seeing through the other side's strategy. We would also pretend that we don't know anything and secretly bring a few of our brothers to this river valley to make a fortune. How great would that be?" Isn't that right, leader? That you're tuning in to the Lime's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.